The snowflakes fell like frozen tears over Pinarest, Wyoming, as 6-year-old Molly Fletcher whispered her Christmas wish to Santa, but she wasn't asking for dolls or ribbons. She was asking for a mother. Her widowed father, Owen, stood frozen in the crowd, his heart shattering all over again. He thought he'd buried his capacity for love alongside his wife 3 years ago. But that night, a red-dressed schoolteacher named Faith O'Brien would walk into their lives and nothing would ever be the same. Stay with us until the end and comment what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. The wind bit hard against Owen Fletcher's weathered face as he guided his daughter through the crowded streets of Pinarest. Christmas Eve, 1883, and the whole town had turned out for the annual celebration. Lanterns swaying from storefronts, the smell of roasted chestnuts and pine needles thick in the air, children's laughter echoing off the wooden boardwalks. But Owen barely noticed any of it. He moved through the festivities like a ghost, his calloused hand wrapped protectively around Molly's small mittened one. "Papa, can you see him? Can you see Santa?" Molly's voice rose with excitement, her breath forming little clouds in the frigid air. Her cheeks were pink with cold, her dark curls escaping from beneath her wool cap, so much like her mother's had been. Owen's jaw tightened at the thought. 3 years. 3 years since consumption had taken Sarah from them, leaving him with a ranch to run, a daughter to raise, and a hole in his chest that never seemed to heal. He'd become harder since then, quieter. The other ranchers respected him, but they also kept their distance. Grief had a way of building walls around a man. "There, sweetheart." Owen pointed toward the town square where a makeshift throne had been erected, red velvet draped over an old chair, cotton batting scattered around like snow. The man playing Santa was Harvey Jenkins, who ran the general store, his naturally round belly barely needing padding beneath the red suit. "You see him?" Molly's squeal of delight cut through the crowd noise. She tugged at Owen's hand, pulling him forward with surprising strength for such a small thing. "Come on, Papa, we have to get in line." The line of children stretched halfway across the square, parents standing patiently behind their little ones, chatting about the weather, the cattle prices, who was courting whom. Owen recognized most of them. The Hendersons, the carpenter's old widow, Mabel, with her grandson. This was Pinarest population, maybe 300 souls, where everybody knew everybody else's business, for better or worse. "Mr. Fletcher," a cheerful voice called out. Owen turned to see Margaret Preston, the banker's wife, waving from beside a table laden with cookies and hot cider. "Molly, dear, would you like a cookie while you wait?" But Molly shook her head, her eyes fixed on Santa with an intensity that made Owen uneasy. She'd been talking about this for weeks, not about presents, oddly enough, but just about seeing Santa, about telling him something important. Every time Owen asked what she wanted for Christmas, she'd just smile mysteriously and say, "Santa will know." It worried him, that secret smile. Molly had been too quiet since her mother died, too serious for a child. She helped around the ranch without complaint, kept her room tidy, never caused trouble. But Owen sometimes missed the wild, carefree girl she'd been, before the one who'd chased chickens and climbed trees and filled the house with noise and life. The line moved slowly. Owen shifted his weight from one foot to the other, his boots crunching in the packed snow. Around them, Pinarest sparkled with rare festivity. The town had grown in recent years. The railroad had brought new commerce, new faces. The old trading post had become a proper general store. They'd built a church last spring, and there was talk of a real school building come summer. "Next," Harvey Jenkins called out in his best Santa voice, "ho, ho, hoing," as a little boy scrambled off his lap. The child ran back to his parents, clutching a peppermint stick, his face glowing with joy. Molly's turn. Owen felt her grip tighten on his hand as they stepped forward. For a moment she hesitated, suddenly shy, pressing against her father's leg. "Go on, sweetheart," Owen murmured gently, nudging her forward. "Santa's waiting." Harvey winked at Owen over Molly's head as she climbed onto his lap, his eyes kind behind the fake white beard. "Well, well, well. And what's your name, little Miss—" "Molly Fletcher, sir." Her voice was barely above a whisper. "Molly Fletcher, I remember you," Harvey boomed. "You've been a good girl this year, haven't you?" Molly nodded solemnly. Owen watched from a few feet away, his arms crossed against the cold, trying to ignore the tightness in his chest. Other parents were closer, hovering, helping their children explain what they wanted. But something held Owen back, maybe the look of fierce determination on his daughter's face, maybe the sense that this moment was hers alone. "And what would you like for Christmas, Molly?" Harvey asked, his voice gentling. Molly glanced back at her father, then leaned close to Harvey's ear. Owen saw her lips move, saw Harvey's jovial expression falter. For just a moment. A flicker of surprise, or was it sadness? The old storekeeper's hand came up to pat Molly's back, his voice dropping so low Owen couldn't hear the words. The conversation lasted longer than most. Owen shifted uncomfortably, aware of the line backing up behind them of curious glances from other parents. Finally, Molly slid down from Santa's lap, clutching a peppermint stick, but without the joy the other children had shown. She walked back to Owen slowly, her small face serious. "Well," Owen knelt down, brushing a curl from her forehead. "Did you tell Santa what you wanted?" Molly nodded, but didn't elaborate. Her dark eyes. Sarah's eyes searched his face with an expression far too old for 6 years. "He said he'd try his best, Papa. He said sometimes Christmas miracles take time." Something cold twisted in Owen's gut. "What did you ask for, Molly?" But she just shook her head, slipping her small hand back into his. "It's a secret, Papa. Santa said some wishes have to be secrets until they come true." Owen wanted to press, but the crowd was moving, flowing toward the church, where they'd be serving supper and singing carols. He let Molly lead him along, his mind churning. A secret wish. A Christmas miracle. What could a 6-year-old possibly want that badly? The church was warm, packed with bodies, and lit by dozens of candles. The smell of pine boughs and beeswax filled the air. Long tables had been set up laden with food brought by every family in town. Roasted turkey, venison stew, fresh bread pies, and cakes. Owen found a spot near the back, settling Molly on the bench beside him, nodding to neighbors but not engaging in conversation. "Mr. Fletcher?" The voice was unfamiliar, soft, and slightly hesitant, with an accent that didn't belong to Wyoming. Owen looked up and found himself staring into the warmest brown eyes he'd ever seen. The woman was young, maybe mid-20s, with auburn hair swept up in a simple style and a red wool dress that had seen better days but was clean and neatly mended. She held a plate of sugar cookies, offering them with a smile that seemed to light up her entire face. "I'm Faith O'Brien," she said when Owen just stared. "The new school teacher I arrived last month from Pennsylvania. I don't believe we've met yet." Owen scrambled to his feet, suddenly aware of his rough appearance, 3 days of stubble, his best shirt that was still worn at the collar, his hands calloused and scarred from ranch work. "Owen Fletcher, ma'am. This is my daughter Molly." "Molly." Faith's smile widened as she knelt down to the girl's level. "What a beautiful name. I have a student named Molly back in Pennsylvania. She was one of my very best readers." Molly peeked out from behind Owen's leg, her shyness warring with curiosity. "You're a teacher." "I am indeed. In fact, I'll be teaching right here in Pinehurst now. We're holding classes in the church basement until the new schoolhouse is built. I do hope you'll join us, Molly." "I can read already," Molly said, her voice gaining confidence. "Mama taught me before she went to heaven, and Papa helps me practice." Faith's expression softened with understanding. "I'm sure your mama was a wonderful teacher, and I'd love to help you keep learning if your father agrees." Owen found himself nodding, though he hadn't planned to. There'd been talk of school before, but he'd always found excuses the ranch needed him. Molly was too young, he could teach her himself. But something about this woman's gentle manner, the genuine interest in her eyes, as she looked at his daughter, made him reconsider. "Cookie, Molly." Faith offered the plate. Molly took one shyly, murmuring her thanks. As Faith straightened her eyes, met Owen's again, and he felt something shift in his chest, a sensation so foreign he almost didn't recognize it. Interest, awareness, the first stirring of something beyond the numbness he'd wrapped around himself like armor. "Will you be staying for the carols, Mr. Fletcher?" Faith asked, her voice carefully polite, but with an undertone of hope that surprised him. Yes. Yes, we will." "Wonderful." Faith's smile returned bright and genuine. "I'll be helping Mrs. Preston serve cider. Please help yourselves." She moved away through the crowd, and Owen found himself watching her go, the graceful way she moved, how she stopped to greet people with real warmth, how children seemed drawn to her naturally. He shook his head, turning back to Molly, who was watching him with an expression he couldn't quite read. "She's nice, Papa," Molly said quietly. "She seems so—" Owen agreed, settling back onto the bench, but his eyes kept drifting across the room, finding the red dress, the auburn hair, the warm smile. The evening wore on. Pastor Williams led them in carols, his voice booming through the small church. Silent night. Hark the herald angels sing. Joy to the world. Owen sang mechanically the words familiar but hollow. He'd always loved Christmas before Sarah died, the music, the celebration, the joy on his wife's face as she decorated their cabin with pine boughs and ribbon. But for 3 years now, he'd just been going through the motions for Molly's sake. Except tonight something felt different. Maybe it was Molly's mysterious wish still nagging at him. Maybe it was the warmth of the crowded church, the reminder that life continued, that Pinterest was growing and changing. Or maybe, and he barely wanted to admit this even to himself, it was the auburn-haired schoolteacher whose laugh he could pick out from across the room, whose presence seemed to pull at something deep inside him that he'd thought died with Sarah. "Papa," Molly tugged at his sleeve. "Can we go home now? I'm tired." Owen nodded, grateful for the excuse to escape the crowd. The noise, the confusing feelings churning in his gut. They made their way to the door, Owen helping Molly into her coat, wrapping her scarf tight against the cold. "Merry Christmas, Mr. Fletcher." He turned to find Faith O'Brien at his elbow, her own cloak wrapped around her shoulders, her cheeks pink from the warmth of the church. "Merry Christmas, Miss O'Brien," he managed. "Faith, please." She knelt down to Molly's level once more. "And Merry Christmas to you, sweet girl. I hope Santa brings you everything you wished for." Molly's face grew serious. "Me too," she whispered. Then to Owen's surprise, she threw her arms around Faith's neck in a quick, fierce hug before pulling back embarrassed. Faith didn't seem fazed. She hugged Molly back gently, then stood, her eyes bright with unshed tears. "Thank you, Molly. That's the best Christmas gift I could have asked for." The walk home took 20 minutes, most of it in silence, except for the crunch of their boots in the snow and the distant howl of wind across the prairie. The Fletcher Ranch sat 2 miles outside town, not a large spread by Wyoming standards, but enough to make a modest living with cattle and horses. The cabin came into view dark and lonely against the white landscape smoke from the banked fire barely visible from the chimney. Inside, Owen stirred the fire back to life, while Molly changed into her nightgown. The cabin was simple, one main room that served as kitchen dining area and living space with 2 small bedrooms off to the side. Owen had built it himself when he and Sarah first married, every log chinked with care, every board planed smooth. It had been filled with love then, with laughter and plans for the future. Now it was just shelter. "Papa," Molly called from her room, "will you tuck me in?" Owen went to her, finding her already under the quilts, her dark hair spread across the pillow. He sat on the edge of the bed, brushing a kiss against her forehead. "Did you have a good Christmas Eve, sweetheart?" Molly nodded. "I told Santa my wish. Do you think it will come true?" Owen's chest tightened. "I don't know, Molly. Sometimes wishes don't come true the way we want them to. But Santa said—" She stopped, pressing her lips together as if remembering it was a secret. "What did you wish for?" Owen asked gently. "You can tell me." For a long moment Molly was silent, her small hands clutching the quilt. Then in a voice barely above a whisper, "I can't tell you, Papa. Not yet, but I wish for something to make you smile again. You used to smile all the time before Mama went away. I miss your smile." Owen's breath caught in his throat. He'd thought he'd been hiding it better. His grief, his exhaustion, his loneliness. But children saw everything, didn't they? They felt everything. "Oh, sweetheart." He pulled her into his arms, holding her close, breathing in the scent of her hair soap and wood smoke and little girl. "I'm sorry. I didn't know. I didn't mean to make you worry." "I'm not worried," Molly said into his shirt. "Because Santa's going to help. He promised to try." Owen had no words for that. He just held his daughter, rocking her gently until her breathing evened out and she drifted to sleep. Then he tucked her in, banking the fire in her small stove, and retreated to the main room. He stood at the window, staring out at the snow-covered landscape silvered by moonlight. The wind had died down, leaving everything still and crystalline and achingly beautiful. Sarah had loved winter, had loved the way snow transformed the harsh prairie into something magical. "What did our daughter wish for?" he asked the empty room, the silent night. "What does she think will make me smile again?" No answer came, just the pop and crackle of the fire, the settling of logs in the cabin walls. Owen poured himself a small glass of whiskey, a rare indulgence, and settled into his chair by the hearth. The Christmas Eve supper sat heavy in his stomach, but his mind wouldn't settle. He kept seeing Faith O'Brien's warm brown eyes, her gentle smile as she knelt to talk to Molly, the way the firelight had caught in her auburn hair, the softness in her voice when she spoke about teaching, about children, about hope for the future. "Foolishness," Owen muttered to himself, draining the whiskey. He had no business thinking about any woman that way. He'd had his chance at love, at happiness. Sarah had been everything to him, his childhood sweetheart, his partner, his best friend. What they'd had was once in a lifetime, to even consider that he could find that again with someone else. But Molly's words echoed in his mind. "You used to smile all the time. I miss your smile." He'd been so focused on survival, keeping the ranch going, keeping Molly fed and clothed and safe, that he'd forgotten about living, about joy, about the possibility that life could be more than just endurance. Owen stood abruptly, pacing to the window and back. The cabin felt too small, suddenly too quiet, too empty. Even with Molly asleep in the next room, the loneliness pressed in on him like the winter cold. He thought about the town meeting scheduled for next week, something about planning for the new schoolhouse they wanted to build by summer. He'd planned to skip it, as he skipped most town functions that didn't directly affect the ranch. But Faith O'Brien would likely be there. The school teacher would have opinions about the building, about what the children needed. And Molly should be in school, shouldn't she? Learning from a real teacher, being around other children. He'd been selfish keeping her out here isolated just because he couldn't bear the thought of losing her for even a few hours a day. Owen returned to his chair, leaning his head back, closing his eyes. Tomorrow was Christmas. He'd bought Molly a new dress, some hair ribbons, a book of fairy tales ordered special from the catalog. Simple gifts, but thoughtful. She'd be happy, or at least she'd pretend to be. That's what they'd both become good at, pretending. But what if they didn't have to pretend anymore? What if there was a way to actually be happy again? To actually smile? "Some wishes have to be secrets until they come true," Molly had said. Owen's eyes snapped open. A terrible, wonderful suspicion began to form in his mind. No, she couldn't have. She wouldn't have. But he remembered the way Molly had hugged Faith O'Brien, the fierce, desperate quality of it, the way his daughter watched him with those two old eyes, worried about him, wishing for his happiness. "Oh, Molly," Owen whispered to the empty room. "What did you do?" The fire burned low. The clock on the mantel ticked toward midnight. Outside, snow began to fall again, soft and steady, covering everything in white. Somewhere in town, Faith O'Brien was probably settling into her boarding house room, maybe writing letters home to Pennsylvania, maybe wondering about the quiet widower and his serious little girl. Owen sat in the darkness, his mind churning with possibilities he'd sworn off years ago. The cabin creaked around him, familiar and lonely. And in the bedroom, Molly slept dreaming of Christmas wishes and miracles of a red-dressed teacher with warm brown eyes who'd hugged her like she mattered. The night deepened. The snow fell, and in his chair by the dying fire, Owen Fletcher began, just barely, just maybe, to hope again. Not for himself. He didn't deserve that, couldn't even imagine that. But for Molly. If his daughter had wished for something, some way to bring light back into their dark little world, then maybe, just maybe, he could be brave enough to let it happen, even if it terrified him, even if it felt like betraying Sarah's memory, even if he had no idea how to open his heart again when he'd locked it away so carefully, so completely. The clock struck midnight. Christmas Day had arrived, and somewhere between the dying embers and the falling snow, something shifted in Owen Fletcher's carefully controlled world, a crack in the armor, a loosening of the chains, a whisper of possibility that maybe, just maybe, life wasn't quite finished with him yet. He thought of Faith O'Brien's smile, and for the first time in 3 years, Owen allowed himself to wonder, what if? Christmas morning dawned cold and clear, the sun glinting off fresh snow like scattered diamonds. Owen woke stiff in his chair, the fire reduced to ash, his neck protesting the awkward angle he'd slept in. For a moment he was disoriented. Then memory flooded back the Christmas Eve celebration. Molly's secret wish. Faith O'Brien's warm eyes. He scrubbed a hand over his face, feeling the roughness of his unshaved jaw, and pushed himself to his feet. From Molly's room came the sound of small feet hitting the floor, then her door creaking open. She appeared in her nightgown, her dark curls wild around her face, eyes bright with the particular excitement that only Christmas morning could bring to a child. "Papa, it's Christmas. Can we open presents?" Despite everything, Owen felt his lips curve into something approximating a smile. "Merry Christmas, sweetheart. Let me get the fire going first, and then we'll see what's under the tree." The tree was modest. A small pine he'd cut from the hills, decorated with strings of popcorn and a few precious glass ornaments that had belonged to Sarah. But Molly treated it like the grandest thing in the world, dancing around it as Owen coaxed the fire back to life and set coffee on to boil. The presents were few, but carefully chosen. Molly squealed over the new dress, green calico with tiny white flowers, and immediately wanted to put it on. The hair ribbons were declared perfect, and the fairy tale book was clutched to her chest like treasure. "Thank you, Papa." "Thank you." She threw her arms around his waist, squeezing tight. "You're welcome, sweetheart." Owen hugged her back, breathing in the scent of her hair, feeling the fierce love that sometimes threatened to overwhelm him. This little girl was his whole world, his reason for getting up each morning, his purpose. If she'd wished for his happiness, how could he not at least try? Molly had made him something too. A drawing, carefully colored, showing 3 stick figures holding hands. One tall one, small one medium-sized, with what appeared to be a dress and auburn hair. Owen stared at it, his throat tight. "Molly, who's this?" She bit her lip, suddenly shy. "That's us, Papa. You and me and the wish I made. Do you like it?" He should have asked more questions. Should have pressed her to explain. Instead, he just pulled her close again, unable to speak past the lump in his throat. His daughter had drawn them as a family, a complete family, and the implications made his chest ache with equal parts fear and longing. They spent the morning quietly, Molly reading from her new book, while Owen prepared a simple Christmas dinner, roasted chicken potatoes, the last of the canned vegetables from summer. The cabin smelled good, homey, but Owen couldn't shake the restless feeling that had settled over him. He kept thinking about the town meeting scheduled for tomorrow, about whether Faith O'Brien would be there, about what he would say to her if she was. By late afternoon, Molly had fallen asleep on the sofa, her new book open across her chest, exhausted from excitement. Owen covered her with a quilt and stood at the window, watching the sun paint the snow in shades of pink and gold. Another Christmas survived. Another year stretching ahead, full of the same routines, the same loneliness, the same careful existence. Unless he chose differently. The thought terrified him. The next morning came too quickly. Owen had barely slept, his mind churning with possibilities and fears. He rose before dawn, did the morning chores by lantern light, feeding the horses, checking on the small herd of cattle, huddled against the cold breaking ice on the water trough. The physical work helped, giving his hands something to do, even if his mind wouldn't settle. Over breakfast, Molly watched him with those dark, knowing eyes. "Papa, are you going to the meeting today?" Owen paused, his coffee cup halfway to his lips. "I'm thinking about it." "Why?" "Because Miss Faith will be there. She told Mrs. Preston she has ideas about the schoolhouse." Molly's voice was carefully casual, but Owen wasn't fooled. His daughter was matchmaking as obvious as could be. "And you think I should hear these ideas, Egum?" "I think you should hear everything." Molly's expression was far too serious for a 6-year-old. "Mama used to say that sometimes God answers prayers in unexpected ways. Maybe that's what's happening now." Owen set down his cup slowly. "Molly, sweetheart, I need you to tell me the truth. What exactly did you ask Santa for?" She pressed her lips together, shaking her head. "Not yet, Papa. It's not time yet. But please go to the meeting. Please." What could he say to that? How could he refuse the hope in his daughter's eyes, even if it scared him half to death? The town meeting was scheduled for 2 o'clock at the church. Owen spent the morning in an agony of indecision, changing his shirt 3 times, shaving carefully, then wondering if he looked like he was trying too hard. Finally frustrated with himself, he hitched up the wagon and helped Molly climb aboard her new green dress, bright against the white landscape. "Do I look pretty, Papa?" she asked, smoothing the skirt. "Beautiful," Owen said honestly. "Your mama would be proud." Molly beamed at him, and for the first time in months, Owen saw genuine happiness in her smile, not the careful, worried expression she usually wore, but real joy. The church was already crowded when they arrived. Owen recognized most of the faces: ranchers and merchants, their wives, a few older children who'd be affected by the new school. Pastor Williams stood at the front organizing papers while Margaret Preston bustled about with her usual efficiency. And there near the front sat Faith O'Brien, in a simple brown dress, her auburn hair caught up in a neat bun, her hands folded in her lap as she waited patiently. Owen's heart did something complicated in his chest. "There's Miss Faith," Molly whispered, pulling at his hand. "Can we sit near her?" Before Owen could protest, his daughter was dragging him forward, maneuvering through the crowd until they reached the row behind Faith. The schoolteacher turned at the commotion, and when she saw them, her face lit up with such genuine pleasure that Owen felt his carefully constructed walls crack a little more. "Mr. Fletcher, Molly, how wonderful to see you." Faith's eyes moved from Molly to Owen and back again, warm and welcoming. "Did you have a nice Christmas?" "The best," Molly declared, sliding into the pew. "Papa got me a book and a new dress, see?" She stood up and twirled, showing off. "It's lovely," Faith said, her smile soft. "That color suits you perfectly." Owen settled beside Molly, acutely aware of Faith just ahead of them, the graceful line of her neck, the way she tilted her head when she listened, the faint scent of lavender that seemed to surround her. He felt like a tongue-tied boy instead of a grown man of 32. "Order, please. Let's come to order," Pastor Williams called, and the crowd gradually settled. "Thank you all for coming today. As you know, we're here to discuss plans for the new schoolhouse. The territory has approved our application and provided some funding, but we'll need to organize the construction ourselves. Miss O'Brien has graciously agreed to share her thoughts on what would serve the children best." Faith rose, and Owen found himself leaning forward, slightly drawn by something he couldn't quite name. She moved to the front with quiet confidence, her hands clasped in front of her, and when she spoke, her voice carried clear and strong through the small church. "Thank you, Pastor Williams, and thank you all for this opportunity." She paused, her gaze sweeping the room, touching briefly on Owen before moving on. "I've been teaching for 5 years now in 3 different schools, and I've learned that a schoolhouse is more than just 4 walls and a roof. It's where children learn to dream, to question, to become who they're meant to be." Owen found himself nodding along with others in the crowd. There was something compelling about the way Faith spoke, not preachy or demanding, but full of genuine passion for her work. "I've drawn up some plans," Faith continued, moving to a board where she'd pinned several sketches. "Nothing fancy, mind you. I know we're working with limited resources, but I believe we can build something that will serve this community for generations." She walked them through her ideas: a single large room with big windows for natural light, a raised platform for the teacher's desk, a pot-bellied stove positioned for maximum heat. Distribution, built-in shelves for books and supplies. She'd thought of everything: coat hooks at child height. A small porch to keep snow and mud from being tracked inside, even a separate entrance for the teacher's modest living quarters, since the school teacher would likely live on site. "Now, I know this seems ambitious," Faith said, her cheeks slightly pink as she faced the crowd. "And I'm open to modifications based on what's practical. But I truly believe that if we're going to build a school, we should build it right. Something we can all be proud of." There was a moment of silence, then James Henderson, one of the larger ranchers, stood up. "Miss O'Brien, these are fine plans, real fine. But building something like this by summer, that's a tall order. We'd need every able-bodied man in the area helping." "I understand that," Faith said quickly, "and I'm not suggesting anyone neglect their own work. But if we could organize work parties, perhaps every Sunday afternoon after church, even just a few hours a week with enough hands, we could accomplish it." More murmurs, some skeptical, some considering. Owen felt something stirring in his chest, an old feeling almost forgotten. Purpose, challenge. the desire to build something, to be part of something larger than just his own survival. He stood up before he could think better of it. "I'll help." Every head in the church turned to look at him. Owen felt heat creep up his neck but held his ground, meeting Faith's surprised gaze. "I've got some carpentry skills, and Sunday afternoons are manageable. I'm willing to help with the construction." Faith's smile could have melted the snow outside. "Thank you, Mr. Fletcher. That's very generous." Her words seemed to break a dam. One by one, other men stood: Tom Carpenter, young Billy Watson, even old Samuel Hayes, who was pushing 70 but still claimed he could swing a hammer with the best of them. Within minutes, Faith had a crew of volunteers, and the energy in the room had shifted from skeptical to enthusiastic. The meeting continued for another hour, discussing logistics, materials, fundraising for supplies they couldn't make or salvage themselves. Owen found himself volunteering to help source timber from his own land, offering his wagon for hauling. Every time he contributed, he felt Faith's eyes on him, warm with gratitude, and something else, something that made his pulse quicken. When the meeting finally adjourned, people clustered in small groups, still discussing plans. Owen was gathering Molly's coat when Faith approached her, hands twisting together nervously. "Mr. Fletcher, I wanted to thank you again. Your support means more than you know. I was afraid no one would take my plans seriously." "They're good plans," Owen said gruffly, not quite meeting her eyes. "Practical, well thought out. The children deserve a proper school." "Including Molly." Faith's voice was gentle. "I noticed her name wasn't on my student roster yet." Owen glanced down at his daughter, who was watching them both with barely contained excitement. I haven't enrolled her yet, but I think it's time. She needs to be around other children learning properly." "I think so too." Faith knelt down to Molly's level. "Would you like that, Molly? Coming to school?" "Yes." Molly practically bounced with excitement. "Could I start soon, even before the new building?" Faith laughed, a sound like bells that made something in Owen's chest expand. "We're still holding classes in the church basement 3 days a week. You could start Monday if your father agrees." She looked up at Owen, and for a moment the crowded church faded away. It was just the three of them, a widowed rancher, a lonely teacher, and a little girl who'd wished for a miracle. Owen saw hope in Faith's eyes, something tender and uncertain, and he recognized it because he felt the same way. "Monday would be fine," he heard himself say. "I'll bring her in around 8. Perfect." Faith stood brushing down her skirts, her cheeks pink. "And Mr. Fletcher, if you'd like to see the classroom before Monday, get a sense of what Molly will be learning, you'd be welcome to visit any time." It wasn't just about the classroom, and they both knew it. Owen swallowed hard. "I might do that. Tomorrow, perhaps. Tomorrow would be lovely." Faith's smile was soft, almost shy. "I'll be there in the afternoon preparing lessons." Molly tugged at Owen's hand, her eyes dancing. "Can we go, Papa? I want to get ready for school." The ride home was filled with Molly's chatter about school, about Miss Faith, about all the things she'd learn. Owen listened with half an ear, his mind replaying the conversation the way Faith had looked at him, the trembling hope he'd felt when she'd said tomorrow would be lovely. He was terrified. He was exhilarated. He was betraying Sarah's memory just by feeling these things. He was honoring Sarah by letting himself live again. The contradictions warred in his chest until he thought he might burst. That night, after Molly was asleep, Owen sat by the fire again, but this time he didn't feel quite so alone. Tomorrow he would see Faith again. They would talk about school, about Molly's education, and maybe, just maybe, about other things too. The possibility hummed through him like electricity, frightening and thrilling in equal measure. He pulled out the drawing Molly had made, the 3 stick figures holding hands. Owen traced the middle figure with one calloused finger, the woman with auburn hair. His daughter had seen something he'd been afraid to acknowledge, some possibility that his frozen heart had refused to consider. "Is this what you want, Molly?" he whispered to the quiet cabin. "Is this your Christmas wish?" No answer came, just the pop of the fire and the whisper of wind outside. But Owen thought he knew. His daughter wanted him to smile again, wanted their house to be filled with warmth and laughter instead of quiet grief. She wanted a mother not to replace Sarah, but to fill the empty space that had existed too long. And maybe, just maybe, Owen wanted something too. Not just for Molly's sake, but for his own. He wanted to feel alive again, to look forward to tomorrow instead of just enduring it. He wanted conversation and companionship, shared laughter and quiet moments. He wanted all the things he'd had with Sarah, the things he'd thought he'd never deserve again. The next afternoon, Owen found himself riding into Pinehurst alone, having left Molly with their neighbor Mrs. Henderson under the pretense of running errands. His hands were sweating inside his gloves despite the cold, and he'd changed his shirt twice again before leaving. He felt ridiculous, like a boy courting for the first time, instead of a grown man with a daughter. The church basement was quiet when he descended the stairs lit by afternoon sunlight streaming through high windows. Faith sat at a desk near the front papers spread before her, so absorbed in her work she didn't hear him approach. Owen paused in the doorway, taking in the scene. The careful way she held her pen, the furrow between her brows, as she concentrated, the way she tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear. She was beautiful, not in the flashy way of saloon girls or the porcelain perfection of wealthy ladies, but in something deeper, something that came from inside. There was kindness in her face, intelligence in her eyes, strength in the set of her shoulders. She was the kind of woman a man could build a life with, the kind of woman who'd stand beside you through hard times and celebrate the good times with equal joy. "Miss O'Brien." Faith looked up startled, and her face transformed with pleasure when she saw him. "Mr. Fletcher, I wasn't sure you'd come." "I said I would." Owen removed his hat, turning it in his hands. "I don't make promises lightly." "No, I don't imagine you do." Faith set down her pen, gesturing to the small chairs arranged in rows. "Please sit. Though I'm afraid these chairs weren't made for men of your size." Despite his nervousness, Owen smiled. "I'll manage." He settled awkwardly into one of the child-sized chairs while Faith gathered up some papers to show him. As she explained the curriculum reading, arithmetic, history, geography, Owen found himself less focused on the content and more on the passion in her voice, the way her eyes lit up when she talked about teaching children to think for themselves, to question, to wonder. "I know some folks think girls don't need much education," Faith was saying, "but I believe every child deserves the chance to learn as much as they can. Molly is clearly bright, you can see it in her eyes. I'd hate to see that potential wasted." Sarah felt the same way. Owen said quietly, "My wife. She was educated unusual for a woman out here. She taught Molly letters and numbers before—" He trailed off, the familiar grief tightening his throat. Faith's hand came to rest gently on his arm, a light touch but full of sympathy. "You must miss her terribly." "Every day." Owen looked down at her hand, so small against his rough sleeve. "It's been 3 years, and I still sometimes turn to tell her something before remembering she's not there. Molly looks so much like her. Same eyes, same stubborn streak." "It's clear you loved her very much," Faith's voice was soft, understanding, "and that you're doing your best for Molly." "Sometimes I wonder if my best is enough." The words came out before Owen could stop them, raw and honest. "I'm not good at the gentle things, the woman things. I can teach Molly to ride and rope, how to read tracks and weather signs. But the rest, the feelings, the talks she'll need as she grows, I'm terrified I'll fail her." "You won't." Faith's conviction was startling. "Do you want to know how I can tell? Because you're here, because you're worried about it. Bad parents don't worry about whether they're good enough." Owen looked up, meeting her eyes, and something passed between them. Understanding, connection, the recognition of two lonely souls finding unexpected comfort in each other. He should pull away, should make excuses and leave before this got complicated. But he couldn't seem to move, couldn't seem to break the moment. "Faith," he said. Then stopped, suddenly aware he'd used her first name without permission. But she didn't correct him. She just smiled, her eyes warm. "Yes, Owen." His name and her voice did something to him, unwound something tight in his chest. That is, would you... God, why was this so hard? He'd proposed to Sarah when they were 17 without breaking a sweat. But that was different. That was a lifetime ago, when he'd been young and confident and sure the world would give him everything he wanted. "Would you like to stay for coffee?" Faith asked gently, saving him from his stumbling. "I have a small stove in the corner. Nothing fancy, but it's warm." Owen nodded, grateful. Coffee would be nice. They moved to a small area Faith had set up as a teacher's space, a battered desk, a couple of real chairs, a tiny stove that did indeed produce passable coffee. As Faith poured, Owen studied the basement classroom more carefully. She tried to make it welcoming despite the bare stone walls, children's drawings tacked up a map of the United States, a slate board for lessons. But it was cramped and dark, and he could see why she was so passionate about the new building. "Tell me about Pennsylvania," Owen said as Faith handed him a cup. "What made you come all the way out here?" Faith settled into the other chair, cradling her own cup. "Heartbreak, mostly. An adventure." She laughed at Owen's expression. "I was engaged to a man back home, a banker's son, very proper, very respectable. But 3 months before the wedding, I discovered he'd been courting another woman simultaneously, someone with a larger dowry." "I'm sorry." "Don't be." Faith's eyes were clear without bitterness. "It hurt at the time, but looking back I can see we weren't suited. He wanted a wife who'd host parties and look pretty in his parlor. I wanted to teach to matter to make a difference. So when the position here came up, I applied. My parents thought I was insane leaving civilization for the wilderness." "And what do you think?" Owen asked. "Now that you're here—" Faith was quiet for a moment, looking around the small basement, then back at Owen. "I think this is where I was meant to be. For the first time in my life, I feel like I'm doing something important, something real. Back in Pennsylvania, I taught wealthy children who didn't need me. Here I can actually help shape lives, give children opportunities they wouldn't otherwise have." She paused, her cheeks coloring slightly. "And I've met people who make me think that maybe home isn't a place. Maybe it's wherever you find connection, purpose, belonging." The air between them felt charged, full of unspoken meaning. Owen set down his coffee cup carefully, his heart hammering. "Faith, I need to tell you something about Molly and Christmas Eve." Faith leaned forward, listening. I'm almost certain that when Molly talked to Santa, she wasn't wishing for toys or trinkets." Owen's voice was rough. "I think she wished for a mother, for someone to fill the empty spaces in our lives, to make me smile again." Faith's eyes widened, her lips parting in surprise. "Owen, I know it's presumptuous. I know we barely know each other, but I thought you should know in case Molly says or does anything that seems forward. She's just a little girl with a big hope." "And what about you?" Faith's voice was barely above a whisper. "What do you hope for?" Owen met her gaze, and for the first time in 3 years, he allowed himself to be completely honest. "I hope that maybe someday I could smile again. That maybe this thing I feel when I look at you isn't betraying Sarah's memory, but honoring it by choosing to live instead of just survive. I hope that Molly's Christmas wish wasn't as impossible as I thought." Faith set down her cup with trembling hands. "Owen, I need you to understand something. I'm not looking to replace your wife. I could never do that, and I wouldn't try. But She took a shaky breath. "I've been alone for a long time, too. Not widowed, but lonely in my own way. And when I look at you and Molly, I see possibility. A chance for something real, something honest. If that makes me forward or improper, I'm sorry, but don't apologize." Owen reached across the space between them, taking her hand in his. Her fingers were small and warm, fitting perfectly against his palm. "Don't ever apologize for being honest." They sat like that for a long moment, hands clasped, eyes locked, neither quite brave enough yet to voice what was building between them, but both acknowledging it silently. Outside, the afternoon was fading into evening. Soon Owen would have to go, would have to collect Molly and return to the ranch and the familiar routines. But something had shifted, something fundamental. He wasn't alone anymore in his grief and longing. Faith understood, and more than that, she was willing to wait while he figured out how to open his heart again. A sudden crash from upstairs made them both jump, hands flying apart. Footsteps thundered overhead, followed by excited voices. Faith laughed shakily, standing up. "The evening service must be starting. I didn't realize how late it had gotten." Owen rose too suddenly awkward again now that the moment had been broken. "I should go. Molly will be wondering where I am." "Of course." Faith walked him to the stairs, her arms wrapped around herself. At the bottom step, she paused.
Owen, Monday. When you bring Molly, would you stay for a few minutes? Let her see you're comfortable with me teaching her. It was a reasonable request, practical, but they both knew it meant more than that. It meant more time together, more opportunities to explore this fragile, frightening thing growing between them. I'll stay, Owen promised. As long as you need. Faith's smile was radiant. Thank you for coming today, for being honest, for everything. Owen wanted to kiss her. The urge was sudden and fierce, taking him by surprise with its intensity. Instead, he just nodded, settling his hat on his head, trying to ignore how his hand shook slightly. Thank you for the coffee and the conversation. He climbed the stairs feeling like he was walking on air despite his confusion and fear. At the top, he paused and looked back. Faith stood at the bottom, one hand raised in farewell. Her face tilted up toward him with an expression of such hope and tenderness that Owen's breath caught. Then he pushed through the door into the cold evening where reality waited, the familiar weight of responsibility, the long ride home, the careful life he'd constructed from grief and determination. But now that life had a crack in it, a sliver of light getting through, and Owen wasn't sure he could or wanted to seal it up again. The ride back to the Henderson place to collect Molly gave him time to think, to process what had just happened. He'd held Faith's hand. He'd admitted his feelings, however clumsily. He'd acknowledged out loud that Molly's Christmas wish might not be impossible after all. And Faith had responded with her own honesty, her own loneliness, her own cautious hope. It felt like betrayal and salvation all at once. When Owen collected Molly, his daughter took one look at his face and knew something had changed. Her eyes went wide, her smile bright enough to light up the darkening evening. You saw Miss Faith, didn't you, Papa? I did. We talked about school, about you starting Monday. Just about school. Molly's voice was knowing, far too knowing for 6 years old. Owen lifted her into the wagon, tucking blankets around her against the cold. We talked about other things, too, about possibilities. Molly clapped her mittened hands together. Santa said Christmas wishes take time, Papa. He said they don't all come true right away, but if you believe and work hard, they can happen. Is that so? Owen climbed up beside her, taking the reins. Uh-huh. And Papa, Molly snuggled against his side, I think Miss Faith is part of my wish. I think she's what Santa sent to make you smile again. Owen's throat tightened. He wrapped an arm around his daughter, pulling her close as the wagon jolted into motion. Maybe she is, sweetheart. Maybe she is. They rode home through the gathering darkness, the stars beginning to emerge overhead, bright and cold and constant. The cabin came into view, its windows dark, waiting for them to bring it back to life with fire and lamplight and presents. It had been just the two of them for so long, Owen and Molly against the world, making do, surviving. But maybe, just maybe, it didn't have to stay that way forever. Maybe there was room for 3 stick figures holding hands, for auburn hair and warm brown eyes, for laughter and conversation, and the slow, careful building of something new from the ashes of something lost. Owen carried Molly inside her head, heavy on his shoulder, and for the first time since Sarah's death, the cabin didn't feel quite so empty. Because now it held more than just memories of the past. Now it held possibilities for the future, fragile and frightening as they were. And in town, Faith O'Brien sat in her small boarding house room, holding a cup of tea gone cold, thinking about calloused hands and honest eyes, and a little girl's desperate wish for happiness. She thought about risk and reward, about leaving safety behind for something real, about the man who looked at her like she might be the answer to questions he'd been afraid to ask. Tomorrow, Molly would start school. Tomorrow would bring another chance to see Owen, to build on the connection forming between them. Tomorrow was full of uncertainty and hope in equal measure. But tonight, both Faith and Owen went to sleep thinking of each other, of possibility, of the slow thawing of hearts that had been frozen too long. And somewhere in the winter darkness, the miracle that Molly had wished for was quietly, carefully beginning to come true. Monday morning arrived with a fresh dusting of snow and a nervousness in Owen's stomach he hadn't felt since his wedding day. He'd been up since before dawn doing chores with unusual efficiency, then fussing over Molly's appearance until she'd finally pushed his hands away with an exasperated laugh. "Papa, I'm fine. Miss Faith won't care if my braids are perfect."
But Owen cared. He wanted everything to be right. Wanted Faith to see that he was trying, that he could be a good father, even without a woman's touch. He'd pressed Molly's new dress himself, heated the iron carefully so he wouldn't scorch the fabric, and now she looked like a proper schoolgirl. Her dark curls neatly plaited, her face scrubbed clean and shining with excitement. The ride into town felt both too long and too short. Molly chattered constantly about what she hoped to learn, what the other children would be like, whether Miss Faith would let her help with the younger students, since she already knew her letters. Owen listened with half an ear, his mind on what he would say when he saw Faith again, how he would act, whether the connection from yesterday had been real or just a momentary weakness on both their parts. Other families were arriving at the church when they pulled up children of various ages tumbling from wagons and horse-drawn carts. Owen recognized most of them, the Henderson boys, wild and loud, the Carpenter girls in matching gingham, young Tommy Weaver clutching his mother's hand nervously. The basement steps were crowded with parents and children, everyone talking at once, and for a moment Owen considered just dropping Molly off and escaping before the crush got worse. Then Faith appeared at the top of the stairs, and Owen's breath caught. She wore a simple gray dress with a white collar, her auburn hair pulled back in a practical bun, but to Owen, she looked like sunlight breaking through storm clouds. Her eyes scanned the crowd, and when they found him, her whole face lit up with such warmth that he felt it like a physical touch. "Good morning," Faith's voice carried over the noise, calm and welcoming. "Parents, please help your children hang their coats on the hooks just inside the door. Students, find a desk with your name on it. Yes, I've labeled them all. Parents, you're welcome to stay for the first few minutes if it helps your little ones settle in." The crowd began to move, a controlled chaos of children and adults funneling down the narrow stairs. Owen kept Molly close, one hand on her shoulder as they descended into the basement classroom. Faith had transformed it since his visit yesterday. More drawings on the walls. Books arranged on makeshift shelves. Each small desk marked with a child's name, written in careful script. The pot-bellied stove in the corner radiated warmth, and morning light streamed through the high windows, making the space feel less like a basement and more like a proper school. Molly spotted her desk immediately, third row, back right side. "Look, Papa, that's mine." She darted forward, running her fingers over the letters of her name, then looked back at Owen with such joy that his chest ached. "You like it, sweetheart?" "I love it." Molly slid into the desk, testing how it felt, her feet barely touching the floor. Around them, other children were doing the same, some confident, others shy, a few already arguing over who got to sit next to whom. Faith moved through the chaos with practiced ease, greeting each child by name, helping the smaller ones out of coats, redirecting the rowdy ones with gentle firmness. She had a gift for it, Owen realized, knowing exactly when to be strict and when to be soft, reading each child's needs with an intuition that seemed almost magical. "Mr. Fletcher." Faith approached slightly breathless, her cheeks pink from the warmth and activity. "Thank you for bringing Molly. How is she feeling?" "Excited." Owen glanced at his daughter, who was already talking animatedly to the girl at the next desk. "More excited than I've seen her in a long time." "That's wonderful." Faith's eyes met his, and for a moment the crowded basement fell away. "And how are you feeling?" The question was simple, but the weight behind it was enormous. She was asking about yesterday, about the things they'd said, about whether he'd changed his mind in the cold light of morning. Owen swallowed hard, aware of the parents still milling about, of curious glances being cast their way. "Nervous," he admitted quietly, "but hopeful." Faith's smile was radiant. "Me too." She started to say something else, but one of the Henderson boys chose that moment to knock over a stack of slates with a tremendous clatter. Faith excused herself quickly, moving to restore order, and Owen found himself just standing there, useless and in the way. He should leave. That was the sensible thing, but he'd promised Faith he'd stay, promised Molly she wouldn't be alone in this new place. So he drifted to the back of the room, leaning against the stone wall, watching as Faith gradually corralled the chaos into something resembling order. "All right, everyone, please take your seats." Faith's voice cut through the chatter with surprising authority. "Parents, thank you for bringing your children. We'll see you at 3 o'clock for pickup." That was his cue to leave. Other parents were heading for the stairs, calling out last-minute instructions to their offspring. But when Owen caught Molly's eye, she gave him such a bright, encouraging smile, almost as if she were the parent and he the nervous child, that he found himself smiling back, some of his tension easing. He climbed the stairs with the other adults emerging into the cold morning air. Most dispersed quickly back to their daily routines, but Owen lingered by his wagon, suddenly reluctant to leave. What would he do with himself for the next 7 hours? The ranch work was caught up. He'd planned to ride out and check the herd, maybe repair some fence line, but none of it seemed urgent enough to pull him away from town. From faith. Owen was still standing there, frozen with indecision, when Pastor Williams emerged from the church proper, bundled in a heavy coat. "Fletcher, good to see you here. Molly, starting school." "Yes, sir." Owen straightened, nodding respectfully. Williams was a good man, a widower himself, who'd come to Pinarest 5 years back and built the church from nothing. "Fine thing, education." Williams stamped his feet against the cold. "Miss O'Brien is a good teacher, patient but firm. The children respond well to her." He paused, studying Owen with shrewd eyes. "She's a good woman, too. Fine Christian character. Be a blessing to any man fortunate enough to win her affection." Owen felt heat creep up his neck despite the cold. Was he that obvious? Could everyone in town see what was happening between him and Faith? "I'm sure she'll make someone very happy someday," Owen said carefully. Williams chuckled. "Don't be coy, Fletcher. I've got eyes. I saw how you two looked at each other at the town meeting, and yesterday when you came to see the classroom." He held up a hand as Owen started to protest. "I'm not gossiping, son. I'm observing. And what I observe is two lonely people who might be good for each other if they're brave enough to try." "It's too soon," Owen said roughly. "Sarah's only been gone 3 years. And how long is long enough?" William's voice was gentle but direct. "I waited 5 years after my Martha passed. 5 years of loneliness and grief, telling myself it would be disrespectful to her memory to love again. You know what I realized? Martha would have hated knowing I was miserable on her account. She'd have wanted me to live to find joy again. I suspect your Sarah would feel the same about you." The words hit Owen like a physical blow. He'd been so focused on not betraying Sarah's memory that he'd never considered what Sarah herself would have wanted. She'd been full of life, full of laughter. She'd loved deeply and openly, without reservation. Would she really want him to spend the rest of his life alone, frozen in grief? "Think about it," William said, clapping Owen on the shoulder. "And don't take too long. Life is short and happiness is precious. Don't throw it away out of misguided loyalty to the past." He walked off toward the parsonage, leaving Owen standing alone in the snow, his mind churning. Around him, Pinarest was coming to life, merchants opening shops, women carrying baskets to the general store, a freight wagon rumbling past on its way to the railroad depot. Normal life, continuing. Despite personal tragedy, despite loneliness, despite fear. Owen climbed into his wagon, slowly taking up the reins. He should go home, should do the work waiting for him. But instead he found himself driving to the general store, tying up outside, entering the warm interior with its smells of leather and coffee and penny candy. Harvey Jenkins looked up from behind the counter, his Santa beard gone, now revealing a weathered face creased with kindness. "Owen, what can I do for you?" "I need—" Owen paused, suddenly uncertain. "I need to order some things for Molly. School supplies." Of course, of course." Harvey pulled out his order book. "Let's see, she'll need slates, chalk, probably a primer, even though you said she can read already. Maybe some paper and pencils for writing practice." They went through the list, Harvey making suggestions, Owen nodding along. But when they were finished, Owen found himself still standing there, turning his hat in his hands. "Harvey, can I ask you something, man to man?" The storekeeper's expression grew serious. "Of course. When Molly talked to you on Christmas Eve when you were playing Santa, what exactly did she say?" Harvey was quiet for a long moment, clearly weighing his words. Finally, he sighed. "She said she wanted a mother, Owen. Not because she didn't love Sarah or had forgotten her, but because she was worried about you. She said you were sad all the time, and she thought maybe if there was a mother again, you might smile more, might be happy." Owen's eyes burned. He blinked hard, staring at the ceiling. "She's 6 years old, Harvey. She shouldn't be worrying about me." "No, she shouldn't. But she does because she loves you. And because she's right, you have been sad. We've all seen it, Owen. You're a good man, a good father, but you're only half alive. Grief has you locked up tight. Harvey leaned across the counter. Your girl deserves a father who's fully present, not just going through the motions. And you deserve to live again. Everyone seemed determined to tell Owen what he deserved today. The frustrating part was that they were right. He knew they were right. He just didn't know how to unlock the chains he'd wrapped around his own heart. Owen left the store with promises to pick up Molly's supplies later in the week. He drove out of town slowly, but instead of heading home, he found himself taking the old trail up to Hawks Ridge, the high point overlooking the valley. It was the place he used to come with Sarah when they needed to think, to talk about their dreams, to watch the sunset paint the mountains in shades of gold and purple. It was also where he'd proposed to her 17 years old, and terrified she'd say no, the ring his grandmother's too big for Sarah's delicate finger, but precious beyond measure. Owen stood at the edge of the ridge, looking out over the valley pine rest, a smudge of buildings in the distance. The railroad tracks cutting across the white landscape, the river frozen and silent. The wind was sharp up here, cutting through his coat, but he barely felt it. "Sarah," he said aloud, his voice carried away by the wind. "I need your help. I need to know if this is okay, what I'm feeling. This woman, Faith, she's nothing like you. You were fire and passion, always moving, always laughing. She's gentler, quieter, but there's strength in her too, and Molly likes her. Molly wished for her even if she doesn't know that's what she did." The wind gusted harder, but Owen kept talking, the words pouring out now that they'd started. "I don't want to replace you. I could never replace you. You were my first love, my best friend, the mother of my child. But I'm so tired, Sarah. I'm tired of being alone, tired of just surviving. I want to live again. I want to smile. I want Molly to have a real home, not just a house where her sad father goes through the motions." His voice broke. "Tell me it's okay. Tell me you'd understand." No answer came, just the wind and the vast silence of the Wyoming wilderness. But as Owen stood there shivering and aching, he felt something shift inside him. Not a voice or a sign, but a release, as if invisible hands had loosened the chains around his heart, just a fraction. Sarah was gone. She'd been gone for 3 years, and standing here freezing and grieving wasn't bringing her back or honoring her memory. It was just wasting the life she'd fought so hard to hold on to during those final terrible months of illness. If their positions had been reversed, if he'd died and left Sarah alone with Molly, what would he have wanted for her? The answer came immediately clearly. He'd have wanted her to be happy, to find love again, to live fully and joyfully, not to waste decades mourning him. Why should he expect less of himself? Owen stayed on the ridge until his feet were numb and his face raw from the wind. Then he rode down slowly, but instead of heading home, he turned back toward town. 3 o'clock was still hours away, but suddenly those hours seemed impossibly long. He wanted to see Faith again, wanted to continue the conversation they'd started, wanted to take the next terrifying step toward whatever this was becoming. He ended up at the town's small lumber mill discussing timber for the schoolhouse with the foreman. Then he stopped by the blacksmith's to talk about hinges and hardware. Useful errands, practical tasks, but also excuses to stay in town to be near Faith, even if he couldn't see her. When 3 o'clock finally arrived, Owen was waiting outside the church with the other parents, his heart hammering foolishly. The basement door opened and children poured out a tide of noise and energy, bundled in coats, clutching papers and slates. Molly emerged near the middle of the pack, her face flushed and happy, talking animatedly to the carpenter girls. "Papa!" She ran to him, throwing her arms around his waist. "Papa! It was wonderful. Miss Faith taught us about the Oregon Trail, and I got to read aloud, and she said I did beautifully." "That's great, sweetheart." Owen hugged her back, relief and joy flooding through him. She was happy. His daughter was genuinely, radiantly happy. Faith appeared in the doorway, helping a smaller child with buttons, then straightening to survey the crowd of parents collecting their offspring. When her eyes found Owen, she smiled, tired but pleased, and raised one hand in greeting. Owen's heart did something complicated. Before he could think better of it, he was walking toward her, Molly's hand in his drawn by something stronger than sense or caution. "Miss O'Brien, how was her first day?" "Wonderful," Faith said warmly, then directed her attention to Molly. You were a star pupil today. I'm so glad you're in my class. Molly beamed. Can I come tomorrow? And the next day? And every day forever? Faith laughed, that bell-like sound that made Owen's chest expand. Well, we only have class 3 days a week until the new school is built. But yes, you can come to every single one. Papa, can I go play in the snow with Emma and Grace, just for a few minutes, please? The Carpenter girls were indeed building a snowman nearby, their mother watching from the wagon. Owen hesitated, then nodded. 10 minutes. Stay where I can see you. Molly ran off, leaving Owen alone with Faith in the thinning crowd. Most of the other parents had already left children bundled into wagons and headed home. The winter afternoon was fading fast, the sun already low behind the mountains. Walk with me, Faith asked quietly. Just for a moment. They moved away from the church toward the small cemetery behind it where Sarah was buried. Owen tensed as he realized where they were heading, but Faith's hand on his arm was gentle. I'm not trying to intrude, she said softly. But I thought you should know Molly talked about her mother today, during our conversation about families. She said her mama was in heaven, but that she still loved her and thought about her every day. Owen's throat tightened. What did you say? I told her that was beautiful, that loving someone who's gone doesn't mean forgetting them, and that I was sure her mama was proud of her. Faith paused, her breath misting in the cold air. Then I told her that people's hearts are big enough to hold many kinds of love, love for those who've passed and love for those still here, and love for new people who come into our lives. That one doesn't replace the other. They'd reached the cemetery fence. Owen could see Sarah's headstone from here, simple granite marked with her name and dates, the words beloved wife and mother carved underneath. He'd stood at that grave so many times in all seasons, all weather, talking to her, asking her questions, seeking forgiveness for failing to save her. Do you think that's true? Owen asked roughly. That the heart is big enough? Faith turned to face him fully, her brown eyes serious and steady. I do. I think we're meant to love, Owen. It's what makes us human, what gives life meaning. And I think the people who loved us, who truly loved us, would want us to keep loving after they're gone, not to close ourselves off out of misplaced loyalty, but to honor their memory by living fully. It was almost exactly what Pastor Williams had said. Owen looked from Faith to the headstone and back again, something breaking open inside him, not painfully, but like ice breaking up in spring, the first rush of meltwater after a long winter. I went up to Hawks Ridge today, he said quietly. The place where Sarah and I used to go. I talked to her, asked her if this was okay, what I'm feeling, what I want. And what do you want, Owen? Faith's voice was barely above a whisper. He made himself meet her eyes, made himself be as honest as he'd been alone on that windswept ridge. I want to know you better. I want to spend time with you, learn your stories, understand what makes you laugh and what makes you angry. I want Molly to have a woman in her life who cares about her, who can teach her the things I can't. And I want, he swallowed hard, I want to feel alive again, to look forward to tomorrow, to smile. Faith's eyes shimmered with tears, but she was smiling too. Those are good wants, Owen, honest wants. But I'm scared, he admitted, scared of betraying Sarah's memory, scared of getting it wrong, scared that I don't know how to do this anymore, how to court a woman, how to open my heart. Then we'll figure it out together, Faith said simply. Slowly. One day at a time. No expectations, no pressure. Just two people getting to know each other, seeing where it leads. From across the churchyard, Molly's voice rang out. Papa, come see our snowman. He's beautiful. The moment broke but gently. Faith stepped back, wrapping her arms around herself against the cold, but her smile remained warm and sure. Your daughter is waiting. Faith, Owen started, then stopped, not sure what he wanted to say. I know, Faith said softly. I know, Owen. Now go. Molly's waiting. He walked back to his daughter slowly, his mind churning, but his heart lighter than it had been in years. Molly's snowman was indeed impressive if lopsided, and he dutifully admired it while Mrs. Carpenter gathered up her girls and loaded them into the wagon. The ride home was filled with Molly's chatter about school, her new friends, everything she'd learned.
Owen listened with genuine attention this time, asking questions, laughing at her stories, feeling present in a way he hadn't managed in so long.
That night after Molly was asleep, Owen sat at the small table and did something he hadn't done in 3 years. He pulled out paper and a pen, and he wrote a letter. Not to Faith, that would be too forward, too presumptuous, but to his sister in Colorado, the sister he'd barely communicated with since Sarah's death beyond terse telegrams about births and deaths and major life events. He told her about Molly starting school, about the new schoolhouse they were planning to build, about the teacher from Pennsylvania who was helping his daughter smile again. He didn't mention his own feelings, not explicitly, but his sister was smart. She'd read between the lines. Writing the letter felt like another chain loosening, another step toward rejoining the world of the living. When it was finished, Owen sealed it carefully, addressed it, and set it by the door to mail tomorrow. Then he sat by the fire, staring into the flames, thinking about warm brown eyes and gentle smiles, and the terrifying possibility of hope. The next morning brought another surprise. Owen was in the barn when he heard hoofbeats approaching fast. He emerged to find Pastor Williams dismounting, his face serious. "Fletcher, we've got a problem. Fire at the livery stables in town. Started about an hour ago. They're trying to get the horses out, but it's spreading fast. Every able-bodied man is needed." Owen didn't hesitate. He saddled his fastest horse, called to Mrs. Henderson, who was doing laundry nearby, to watch Molly, and rode hard for town with Williams. Black smoke was visible long before they arrived, a column rising into the pale morning sky. The scene was chaos. The livery stable was fully engulfed, flames shooting through the roof. Men were running in and out, leading terrified horses to safety, passing buckets of water in a line that Owen knew was futile against a fire this size. The bucket brigade wasn't about saving the building, it was about keeping the fire from spreading to the structures nearby. Owen threw himself into the work, taking a position in the bucket line between Tom Carpenter and old Samuel Hayes. The heat was intense, the smoke choking. Somewhere nearby, women were organizing, bringing water and blankets for the rescued horses, but Owen couldn't see details through the smoke and chaos. Then he heard a scream, high and terrified. A child's scream. Owen's blood went cold. He dropped his bucket and ran toward the sound, pushing through smoke and people. There, near the back of the stable, stood one of the younger Weaver children, maybe 4 years old, frozen in terror as flames licked closer. "Tommy!" Mrs. Weaver was screaming, trying to reach her son, but 2 men were holding her back. The fire was too intense, the structure too unstable. Owen didn't think. He just moved, yanking his bandana up over his mouth and nose, running toward the child. The heat was incredible, the smoke blinding. He grabbed Tommy, tucking the boy against his chest, and turned to run back. That's when he saw her. Faith O'Brien emerging from the stable, leading a panicked mare, her face streaked with soot, her dress torn. She'd gone into the fire to save a horse, this gentle schoolteacher from Pennsylvania, this woman who'd probably never seen anything more dangerous than a barn cat. "Faith!" Owen's shout was lost in the roar of flames. He ran toward her, Tommy still clutched in his arms, just as a section of the roof gave way with a tremendous crack. Everything slowed down. Owen saw the burning timber falling, saw Faith looking up too late, saw death rushing toward her. He couldn't reach her, couldn't save her, could only watch, as a hand grabbed Faith's arm, yanking her sideways. Tom Carpenter, appearing from nowhere, pulled her clear just as the timber crashed down where she'd been standing. The mare bolted, but Faith was safe, stumbling into Tom's arms, coughing and gasping. Owen reached them a moment later, depositing Tommy into his mother's arms, then grabbing Faith's shoulders, searching her face frantically. "Are you insane? What were you thinking?" "The horses?" Faith gasped out between coughs. "They were trapped. I had to—" "You could have died!" Owen's voice was harsh with fear and fury. "You could have been killed." "But I wasn't." Faith straightened, pulling away from his grip, her eyes flashing despite the soot and exhaustion. "And neither were the horses. Sometimes you have to take risks, Owen. Sometimes you have to choose courage over safety." She walked away before he could respond, moving to help with the other rescued animals. And Owen stood there shaking, not with cold, but with the delayed shock of how close she'd come to being crushed, burned, killed, before whatever was growing between them even had a chance to bloom. The fire burned itself out over the next several hours. The livery stable was a total loss, but no lives had been taken, human or animal. It was considered a miracle, though Owen knew it was more than that. It was brave people making brave choices, people like Faith O'Brien, who'd run into danger instead of away from it. As the adrenaline faded and the crowd began to disperse, Owen found Faith sitting on a bench outside the general store, wrapped in a borrowed blanket, her face cleaned but her dress ruined beyond repair. She looked exhausted, small, vulnerable, nothing like the fierce woman who'd led a horse out of an inferno. Owen sat down beside her without asking permission. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. "That was the stupidest, bravest thing I've ever seen," Owen finally said. "Thank you." Faith's voice was hoarse from smoke. "I think... don't ever do it again." "I can't promise that." Faith turned to look at him, her brown eyes serious despite her exhaustion. "I'm not reckless, Owen, but I'm not helpless either. Where I come from, women are expected to be delicate, to need protection, to faint at the first sign of trouble. But I'm not built that way. If something needs doing, I do it. Even if it kills you." "Even then," Faith's voice was steady. "Because what's the alternative? Standing back and watching while others risk themselves. Being useless. I can't live like that, Owen. I won't." Owen understood, then really understood. Faith wasn't some fragile flower who needed protecting. She was strong in her own way, capable, brave, the kind of woman who'd make a true partner, not just someone to care for. She'd fight beside him, not hide behind him. She'd be an equal, not a dependent. "You terrified me," he admitted quietly. "When I saw that timber falling, when I thought you'd be crushed. Faith, I realized that I can't lose you, not when I just found you." Faith's hand found his under the blanket, their fingers intertwining. "You didn't lose me. I'm right here. Promise me you'll be more careful." "I promise to try." She squeezed his hand. "But Owen, you have to understand this is who I am. I run toward trouble, not away from it. If that's not what you want..." "It's exactly what I want," Owen interrupted. He lifted their joined hands, looking at them, his rough and scarred, hers, smaller, but strong, both marked now by soot and ash. "I don't want someone helpless. I want someone brave, someone real, someone who'll stand with me, not behind me." Faith leaned her head against his shoulder, and Owen felt something inside him finally fully unlock. This woman, this impossible, wonderful woman who taught children and saved horses and believed in miracles. She was Molly's Christmas wish come true. Maybe his wish too, the one he'd been too afraid to even acknowledge. They sat like that as the winter afternoon faded around them, two people covered in soot and exhaustion, their hands intertwined, their hearts cautiously, carefully opening to the possibility that maybe life wasn't finished with either of them yet, that maybe courage could lead to joy and risk to reward, and that sometimes the best things came from the ashes of what was lost. The fire changed something fundamental in Pinehurst and in Owen Fletcher's carefully guarded heart. News of Faith's bravery spread through town like wildfire itself, the story growing with each retelling until she'd supposedly saved a dozen horses single-handedly while battling flames as tall as buildings. Faith herself was mortified by the attention, insisting she'd only done what anyone would have done, but the townspeople wouldn't hear it. To them, the new schoolteacher had proven herself one of their own. Not some delicate Eastern lady, but a true Wyoming woman, tough and capable when it mattered. Owen drove Faith back to her boarding house that evening, both of them still smelling of smoke, despite Mrs. Preston's best efforts to clean them up. Molly sat between them on the wagon seat, uncharacteristically quiet, her small hand gripping Faith's tightly, as if afraid the teacher might disappear if she let go. "You were very brave, Miss Faith," Molly said as they pulled up outside the modest boarding house run by Widow Abernathy. "Like a hero in Papa's stories." Faith smiled tiredly. "I wasn't trying to be a hero, sweetheart. I just saw something that needed doing." "Mama used to say that too," Molly said softly. "She said being brave isn't about not being scared. It's about doing the right thing even when you are scared." Owen felt his chest tighten at the mention of Sarah. But instead of the sharp pain he usually felt, there was something gentler, now a bittersweet ache mixed with gratitude that his daughter remembered her mother's words, that Sarah's wisdom lived on through Molly even 3 years after her death. Faith's eyes met Owen's over Molly's head, understanding and compassion clear in their depths. Your mama was very wise, she said to Molly. I wish I could have known her. She would have liked you, Molly said with the absolute certainty only children possess. I know she would have. Owen helped Faith down from the wagon, his hands lingering at her waist, perhaps a moment longer than strictly necessary. Get some rest, he said quietly. You've earned it. Will I see you Sunday? Faith asked, her voice low enough that only Owen could hear. For the work party on the schoolhouse, Sunday, 4 days away. It seemed impossibly long. Wild horses couldn't keep me away. Faith's smile was soft and private, meant just for him. Good, because I'm going to need your carpentry skills and your company. She went inside, pausing at the door to wave to Molly, and Owen stood watching until the door closed behind her. Only then did he climb back onto the wagon, taking up the reins with hands that trembled slightly. Papa, Molly's voice was thoughtful. Do you like Miss Faith? Owen considered lying deflecting, but his daughter deserved honesty. Yes, sweetheart, I like her very much. Like you liked Mama. The question was harder. Owen guided the horses through Pinerest's quiet streets, thinking carefully about his answer. Different than I liked Mama, he finally said. Your Mama and I grew up together. We were friends before we were anything else. Miss Faith she's someone I'm getting to know now as a grown man, not a boy. The feelings are different, but that doesn't make them less real or less good. Molly was quiet for a long moment, processing this. Then she snuggled closer to Owen's side. I think Mama would like that you're happy again, Papa. I think she'd want that. Out of the mouths of babes, Owen thought his throat tight. His 6-year-old daughter understood something it had taken him 3 years to even begin to accept. The next few days passed in a strange blur. The town rallied around the livery owner, starting a collection to help him rebuild. Faith returned to teaching, though Owen noticed she moved a bit stiffly and had a bandage on one hand where she'd apparently burned it during the rescue. Molly came home from school each day with stories about Miss Faith, how she'd taught them about prairie wildlife, how she'd organized a spelling bee, how she'd helped Tommy Weaver with his letters when he struggled. Owen found excuses to be in town more often than strictly necessary. He told himself it was about the schoolhouse planning, about ordering supplies, about checking on the fire recovery efforts. But the truth was simpler and more terrifying. He wanted to be near Faith, wanted to see her smile, hear her laugh, watch the way she moved through the world with quiet confidence and grace. On Thursday, he found himself at the boarding house during Faith's lunch break, ostensibly to discuss timber deliveries, but really just to see her, Mrs. Abernathy showed him to the small parlor with a knowing smile that made Owen's ears burn, then left them alone with the door properly open. Of course, this was still a respectable establishment. Faith appeared a few minutes later looking surprised and pleased. She'd changed from her teaching dress into something simpler, her hair loose around her shoulders instead of pinned up. Owen's breath caught at the sight of her like this, unguarded and informal. Owen, I wasn't expecting you. I was in town anyway. He lied badly. Thought I'd discuss the timber situation. The timber situation. Faith's eyes sparkled with amusement. She knew exactly why he was there. Of course. Would you like some coffee while we discuss this pressing timber situation? They sat in the parlor, cups cooling between them as conversation meandered from schoolhouse plans to ranch life to Faith's childhood in Pennsylvania. Owen learned that she'd grown up in a large family, 5 brothers and 2 sisters, which explained her comfort managing rowdy children. She'd always loved teaching, even as a girl setting up pretend schools with her younger siblings as reluctant students. My father wanted me to marry well and settle down, Faith said, her voice wistful. He never understood why I wanted to work, why I wasn't satisfied with the life he'd planned for me. We argued about it constantly until I finally just left. I wrote him from here telling him I'd taken the teaching position. He hasn't written back. I'm sorry, Owen said, meaning it. He couldn't imagine being estranged from family, though he supposed his own negligence in writing to his sister wasn't much better. Don't be. I made my choice knowing the consequences. Faith set down her cup, meeting Owen's eyes directly. I chose freedom over security, possibility over certainty. I don't regret it. Even after running into burning buildings, Faith laughed. Especially after that. I'm alive, Owen. Really, truly alive.
Not just existing in someone else's vision of what my life should be, but actually living. Making my own choices, my own mistakes, my own triumphs. Can you understand that? Owen thought about the last 3 years going through the motions, existing but not truly living. Yes, he said quietly. I understand that better than you know. The conversation shifted then, growing deeper and more personal. Faith asked about Sarah, and instead of changing the subject or giving terse answers as he usually did, Owen found himself actually talking about her, about their childhood together, their marriage, the joy of Molly's birth, the nightmare of Sarah's illness. I couldn't save her. Owen said the words raw. I tried everything, doctors, medicines, even a faith healer that came through town. Nothing worked.
I had to watch her fade away, getting weaker and thinner until she was barely there anymore. And all I could do was hold her hand and lie to her, tell her she'd get better, that we'd have more children, that we'd grow old together. Faith's hand covered his on the table, warm and solid and real. That wasn't lying, Owen. That was hope. That was love. It felt like failure. It wasn't. Faith's voice was fierce. You gave her comfort in her final days. You gave her love. You let her believe in a future even when you knew there wasn't one. That's not failure, Owen. That's the most generous gift one person can give another. Owen stared at their joined hands, feeling something crack open inside him, the last resistance, the final wall. I'm afraid, he whispered. Afraid of caring for you this much. Afraid of losing you like I lost her. Afraid that God or fate or whatever controls these things will punish me for daring to be happy again. Oh, Owen. Faith shifted her chair closer, both hands wrapping around his now. Life doesn't work that way. Tragedy isn't punishment. Loss isn't retribution. Sometimes terrible things happen to good people, and there's no reason, no lesson, no cosmic meaning. It just is. Then how do you keep going? Owen asked, his voice breaking. How do you keep opening your heart when you know it might get destroyed? Because the alternative is worse. Faith's eyes were bright with unshed tears. Living in fear, closing yourself off, refusing to love because love might hurt. That's not living, Owen. That's just a slower kind of dying. The truth of her words settled over him like a weight and a relief all at once. She was right. He'd been dying slowly for 3 years, going through the motions of life without actually participating in it. And in trying to protect himself from more pain, he'd guaranteed himself a different kind of suffering, the loneliness, the emptiness, the half-existence that had become his normal. I want to court you properly, Owen said, suddenly the words tumbling out before he could second-guess them. If you'll have me. I want to come calling, take you to church socials, let the whole town know I'm interested. I want to do this right, Faith. You deserve that. Faith's smile was radiant, tears spilling over now, tracking down her cheeks. Yes, she said simply. Yes, Owen, I'd like that very much. Mrs. Abernathy chose that moment to bustle in with fresh coffee, her timing so perfect that Owen suspected she'd been listening at the door. But her smile was kind as she poured, and when she left again, she made sure the parlor door stayed wide open. Propriety maintained, but privacy respected. They talked for another hour, making plans, sharing dreams, learning each other's rhythms and quirks. Owen discovered that Faith sang when she was happy, couldn't cook worth a damn, but made excellent coffee and had a fierce competitive streak that came out during games. Faith learned that Owen could carve intricate figures from wood, that he'd once wanted to be a teacher himself before ranch life claimed him, and that he was surprisingly well-read for a cowboy with a particular love for poetry that he'd never admitted to another living soul. When Owen finally left, the winter afternoon was fading into evening. He felt lighter than he had in years, as if he'd set down a burden he'd been carrying so long he'd forgotten it was there. The ride home passed in a blur of thoughts and feelings, hope and fear tangled together, but the hope winning, finally winning. Molly took one look at his face when he walked in and squealed with delight. You talked to Miss Faith, you did? I can tell. Owen couldn't help but laugh, scooping his daughter up and spinning her around the cabin. You're too smart for your own good, you know that. Are you going to marry her? Molly demanded, practical as always. Whoa, slow down there, sweetheart. I'm going to court her first. That means spending time together, getting to know each other better. Marriage is a long way off yet. But someday, Molly's eyes were hopeful, almost desperate. Owen set her down kneeling so they were eye to eye. Maybe someday, he said honestly. If things work out, if we're good together, if she wants that too. But Molly, you have to understand, even if Miss Faith and I do get married someday, she won't be trying to replace your mama. Nobody could replace your mama. I know that, Papa. Molly's voice was patient, as if explaining something obvious to a slow adult. But Mama's in heaven, and Miss Faith is here. And you can love them both just like you said. Hearts are big enough. Owen pulled his daughter close, holding her tight, marveling at her wisdom and her generosity of spirit. When did you get so smart? I've always been smart, Molly said matter-of-factly. You just haven't been paying attention. She was right about that too. Owen had been so wrapped up in his own grief that he'd missed his daughter growing up becoming this remarkable little person with her own thoughts and feelings and surprising depth of understanding. Sunday arrived bright and cold, perfect weather for the first schoolhouse work party. Owen and Molly arrived early to find a crowd already gathering, men with tools, women with baskets of food, children running and playing in the snow. The foundation had been laid the previous fall before the ground froze, and now it was time to start on the actual structure. Faith stood in the center of it all, consulting with Pastor Williams and Tom Carpenter, her cheeks pink from cold and excitement. She'd drawn up detailed plans showing exactly how the building should go together, and now she walked the volunteers through each step with the confidence of someone who'd clearly done her research. Owen found himself assigned to the framing crew, working alongside Tom and several other experienced carpenters. It felt good to work with his hands to build something instead of just maintaining what already existed. The rhythm of hammer and saw the smell of fresh-cut lumber, the satisfaction of watching walls take shape from raw materials. It reminded him of building his cabin with Sarah Young and full of dreams and certainty that the future would be kind. At noon, the women set out lunch, hearty stew, fresh bread pies, and cakes. Owen found himself seated on a stack of lumber with Faith beside him, both of them bundled in coats, balancing plates on their laps. Around them, the community ate and talked and laughed, the air full of good feeling and shared purpose. It's coming together nicely, Faith said, surveying the rising walls with satisfaction. At this rate, we might actually finish by summer. We'll finish, Owen assured her. Pinarest doesn't quit once it starts something. I'm learning that. Faith's shoulder pressed against his warm despite the cold. I'm learning a lot of things about this place, and about the people in it. She was looking at him when she said it, and Owen felt heat rise in his face that had nothing to do with the temperature. They were courting now, officially, but it still felt strange and new and terrifying in the best possible way. Miss Faith. Miss Faith. Molly came running up, Emma Carpenter in tow. Can we help, please? We promise to be careful. Faith considered, then nodded. You can sort nails by size. That would be very helpful, but stay well back from where the men are working with hammers and saws. The girls ran off importantly with their assignment, and Faith laughed. They're going to lose half those nails in the snow, you know. Probably, Owen agreed, but they'll feel useful, and that matters. The afternoon wore on, productive and satisfying. By the time the light began to fade, the schoolhouse walls were half raised, the skeleton of the building clear against the sky. People began packing up tools, gathering children, making plans for the next work party. Owen was helping load lumber into a wagon when he heard raised voices from the direction of the church. He looked up to see a well-dressed stranger arguing with Faith, his gestures sharp and aggressive. Owen's protective instincts flared immediately. He dropped what he was doing and strode over. Ridiculous for a woman of your breeding to be living in this God-forsaken place, the stranger was saying. Father sent me to bring you home, Faith, to bring you to your senses. I am home, Marcus. Faith's voice was tight but controlled. And I don't need anyone to bring me to my senses. I'm perfectly sane. Owen reached them, placing himself slightly between Faith and the stranger, Marcus apparently. Up close, Owen could see the family resemblance, the same auburn hair, the same nose and chin. This must be one of Faith's brothers. Is there a problem here? Owen asked, his voice carefully neutral. Marcus looked Owen up and down with obvious disdain, taking in the work clothes, the calloused hands, the rough appearance. And who are you? Owen Fletcher, a friend of your sister's. A friend. Marcus's tone made it clear what he thought of that. He turned back to Faith. Is this what you've been reduced to, consorting with cowboys and living in squalor, teaching children in a church basement? Faith, this is beneath you, beneath our family. Faith's face went pale, then flushed with anger. Don't you dare speak about Owen that way. Don't you dare come into this town and insult people you know nothing about. I know enough, Marcus shot back. I know you've thrown away every advantage you had, every opportunity for what to play schoolmarm in the middle of nowhere to associate with men like this. He gestured dismissively at Owen. Something in Owen snapped. He'd dealt with plenty of Eastern prejudice before the assumption that anyone living west of the Mississippi was somehow less civilized, less worthy. Usually, he ignored it. But hearing this pompous fool insult Faith, insult her choices, insult the life she'd built here, that was too much. Your sister, Owen said, his voice dangerously quiet, is the bravest, most capable woman I've ever met. She's making a real difference here, teaching children who desperately need education, building something that matters. That's more than most people can say, regardless of their breeding or bank account. Marcus's face reddened. How dare you? Marcus, stop. Faith's voice cracked like a whip. You need to leave now. I'm not going back to Pennsylvania. I'm not abandoning my students or my school or my life here. Tell Father I'm happy. Tell him I'm exactly where I belong. You'll regret this, Marcus said, but his certainty was wavering. When winter truly sets in, when you're cold and hungry and alone. She won't be alone, Owen heard himself say. The words were out before he could think better of them, loaded with implication and promise. She has friends here, people who care about her, people who appreciate her for who she is, not who they want her to be. Faith's hand found his gripping tight. Owen squeezed back, standing his ground against Marcus's glare. Finally, Faith's brother threw up his hands in disgust. Fine. Throw your life away. But don't come crying to us when this all falls apart. He stalked toward a hired carriage waiting near the church, then paused and looked back. You were always the stubborn one, Faith. I just hope your pride is worth the price you'll pay for it. He climbed into the carriage and drove off, leaving Faith trembling beside Owen, her hands still locked in his. Around them, the Sunday work party crowd was pretending not to watch, while obviously watching everything. I'm sorry, Faith whispered. I'm so sorry you had to deal with that. Don't apologize for him. Owen turned to face her fully, both his hands holding hers now. He's wrong, Faith, about all of it. You haven't thrown your life away. You've claimed it. But he's right about one thing, Faith said, her voice shaking. I have given up everything, my family, my security, any chance of going back. If this doesn't work out, if I fail here, you won't fail. Owen's certainty surprised even himself. I won't let you. This town won't let you. You've already proven yourself 10 times over, Faith. Your brother doesn't get to take that away with his narrow-minded opinions. Faith looked up at him, tears streaming down her face now. Thank you, she whispered. Thank you for standing up for me. Thank you for believing in me. Owen wanted to kiss her. The urge was overwhelming to pull her close right there in front of God and the whole town, and seal his commitment with action instead of just words. But that would be too forward too fast, especially after her brother's insinuations about their relationship. Instead, he just held her hands tighter. Come to dinner at the ranch next Sunday, he said quietly. After church. Let me and Molly show you what real family looks like. Not the family you're born with, but the family you choose. Faith nodded, unable to speak past her tears. Molly appeared at that moment, wrapping her arms around Faith's waist in fierce solidarity. Other townspeople were approaching too, Mrs. Preston with a handkerchief, Tom Carpenter offering to drive Faith back to her boarding house, Pastor Williams with quiet words of support. The message was clear: Faith O'Brien belonged to Pinterest now. The town had claimed her, would protect her. Wouldn't let anyone, not even her own family, drive her away or make her feel less than the remarkable woman she was. Owen stepped back, letting others take their turn, comforting Faith, but his eyes never left her. This woman, this impossible, wonderful woman, had faced down her own brother for the right to live her life on her own terms. She'd chosen teaching over security freedom, over family approval possibility, over certainty. She'd chosen courage. And watching her now surrounded by people who valued her for who she truly was, Owen felt something settle deep in his chest. This wasn't just attraction or loneliness or rebound feelings. This was real. This was the kind of love that built futures, that weathered storms, that lasted. He was falling in love with Faith O'Brien. Maybe had been since that first night at the Christmas celebration when she'd smiled at his daughter with such genuine warmth. Maybe since the town meeting when she'd shared her dreams with such passion. Maybe since the fire when she'd proven her courage and strength. Or maybe it had been inevitable from the moment Molly had whispered her wish to Santa, setting in motion a chain of events that would bring three lonely souls together and forge them into something new and beautiful and lasting. The winter sun was setting, painting the half-built schoolhouse in shades of gold and rose. Owen stood watching as Faith gradually composed herself, wiping her eyes, managing a shaky laugh at something Mrs. Preston said. She caught his eye across the crowd and smiled, tremulous but real, and Owen smiled back. Next Sunday couldn't come fast enough. Next Sunday, Faith would come to dinner at the ranch. She'd see where he and Molly lived, would sit at their table, would maybe start to imagine herself as part of their small family. It was too soon for proposals, far too soon. But it wasn't too soon for hope, for vision, for allowing himself to dream about a future that included this brave, beautiful, impossible woman who'd walked into his frozen life and brought the first stirrings of spring. The work party dispersed slowly, people heading home in the fading light. Owen collected Molly, who was full of outrage about that mean man who made Miss Faith cry. They loaded into the wagon, but before leaving, Owen guided the horses over to where Faith stood with Mrs. Preston. "Sunday," he said simply, catching Faith's eye. "After church. We'll be waiting." Faith's smile was like sunrise. "I'll be there." The ride home was quiet. Molly finally exhausted from the excitement of the day. Owen's mind churned with everything that had happened, the progress on the schoolhouse, Marcus's ugly confrontation, the way the town had rallied around Faith, the dinner invitation that felt like so much more than just a meal. He was taking steps, real steps, toward building something new, toward letting go of the past without forgetting it, toward honoring Sarah's memory by living fully instead of just surviving, toward giving Molly the complete family she'd wished for and giving himself a second chance at happiness he thought was lost forever. The cabin came into view warm and welcoming in the twilight. Home. But soon maybe it would be more than just a place he and Molly existed. Maybe it would be filled with Faith's laughter, her singing, her warm presence, turning a house back into a home. Owen carried his sleeping daughter inside, tucking her into bed still in her clothes because she was too deeply asleep to wake. Then he stood at the window looking out at the star-filled sky, and for the first time in 3 years, he let himself truly hope. Let himself truly dream. Let himself truly believe that maybe, just maybe, the best parts of his life weren't behind him, but still ahead, waiting to be discovered with an auburn-haired teacher who traveled across the country to find her own dreams, and in the process had helped him remember his. The week between Sunday work parties felt interminable. Owen found himself working with unusual distraction, his mind wandering to thoughts of Faith, even when he should have been focused on mending fence or checking cattle. He caught himself smiling at odd moments, humming tunes he hadn't thought of in years, feeling lighter despite the heavy work and bitter cold. Molly noticed, of course. His daughter had become an expert at reading his moods, and she approached the upcoming Sunday dinner with the seriousness of a general planning a campaign. By Wednesday, she'd already decided what dress she'd wear, what flowers they'd pick despite it being winter, how they'd arrange the table to make Faith feel welcome. "We should use Mama's good dishes," Molly announced over breakfast on Thursday. "The ones with the blue flowers. Miss Faith would like those." Owen paused his coffee cup halfway to his lips. Sarah's wedding china packed away since her death too painful to use. "Are you sure, sweetheart? Those were special to your mama." "That's why we should use them," Molly said with simple logic. "Mama loved having company. She'd want us to use her pretty things for someone special. And Miss Faith is special, isn't she, Papa?" "Yes," Owen said quietly. "She is." They spent Saturday cleaning the cabin from top to bottom,
Molly attacking the task with enthusiasm while Owen tried to see his home through Faith's eyes. It was modest by any standard, rough wooden walls, simple furniture, most of which he'd built himself, braided rugs Sarah had made during long winter evenings. But it was clean and sturdy and warm, filled with small touches that made it a home rather than just shelter. Owen pulled out Sarah's china, carefully washing each piece with reverent hands. The blue flowers still looked fresh, the porcelain still gleamed despite years in storage.
He set the table while Molly arranged pine branches in a vase for a centerpiece, and when they were finished, the cabin looked almost festive. That night, Owen stood at the window long after Molly had gone to bed, staring out at the star-filled darkness. Tomorrow, Faith would be here. Tomorrow, his two worlds would truly collide, the life he'd built with Sarah represented by this cabin and these possessions and all these memories and the future he was tentatively reaching toward with Faith. "Help me do this right," Owen whispered to the night, to Sarah, to God, to whoever might be listening. "Help me honor what was while embracing what could be." Sunday morning dawned clear and bright, deceptively warm sunshine that did nothing to combat the February cold. Owen and Molly dressed in their church-best, Owen shaving carefully and slicking back his hair. Molly in her green dress with matching ribbons. The church service felt endless. Pastor Williams preached about new beginnings and God's grace, and Owen wondered if the man had deliberately chosen that theme, or if it was divine timing. He found himself unable to focus on the words, too aware of Faith, sitting 3 rows ahead, her auburn hair caught up beneath a modest hat, her shoulders straight and proud, despite what must have been a difficult week following her brother's visit. When the service finally ended, Owen helped Molly into her coat with trembling hands. Faith was surrounded by well-wishers, as usual townspeople who'd taken her to their hearts. Owen hung back, not wanting to rush her, giving her time to finish her conversations. Finally, she turned and their eyes met across the crowded church. Faith's smile was radiant, and Owen felt his heart do something complicated in his chest. She made her way through the crowd toward him, and Owen was struck again by how beautiful she was, not in any conventional way, but in something deeper, something that shone from inside. "Ready?" Owen asked when she reached them. "More than ready," Faith said softly. "I've been looking forward to this all week." The wagon ride to the ranch was filled with Molly's chatter, the little girl pointing out landmarks and telling stories, barely pausing for breath. Faith listened attentively, asking questions, laughing at Molly's observations, and Owen found himself falling a little more in love with every passing moment. When the cabin came into view, Owen felt a flutter of nervousness. What if Faith found it too rough, too primitive, compared to what she was used to in Pennsylvania? What if the reality of ranch life, the isolation, the hard work, the simple accommodations made her reconsider what was growing between them? But Faith's face lit up as they approached. "Oh, Owen, it's charming. Look at the way it sits against the hills, and that view, it's breathtaking." Owen helped her down from the wagon, his hands spanning her waist, and for a moment they stood close enough that he could see the gold flecks in her brown eyes, could smell the faint lavender scent she wore. "Welcome," he said simply, then stepped back before he did something foolish like kiss her in broad daylight with his daughter watching. Inside, Faith exclaimed over everything, the craftsmanship of the furniture Owen had built, the cozy arrangement of the rooms, the blue-flowered china set out so carefully. She ran her fingers over the dishes with something like reverence. "These are beautiful, Owen. Are they family pieces?" "They were Sarah's," Owen said quietly. "Her wedding china. Molly thought we should use them today, and I agreed. Sarah always loved having company, loved using her pretty things. She'd want them to be used, not packed away gathering dust." Faith's eyes shimmered with tears. "Thank you for trusting me with them. I'll be very careful." "I know you will." Owen met her gaze steadily. "That's not why I'm using them, though. I'm using them because you're important, Faith. To me, to Molly, to this family we're carefully building. And important occasions deserve the good china." Molly chose that moment to tug on Faith's hand. "Come see my room. I cleaned it special for you." Faith let herself be dragged away, and Owen heard their voices from Molly's small bedroom, his daughter proudly showing off her treasures, Faith exclaiming over drawings and the fairy tale book Owen had given for Christmas. He stood in his kitchen, listening to the sound of female voices in his home for the first time in 3 years, and felt something break open inside him. Not painfully, but like ice finally releasing its grip, allowing spring to return. Dinner was a roasted chicken with potatoes and carrots, simple fare, but well prepared. Owen had worried about his cooking. He was competent but hardly skilled, but Faith praised everything enthusiastically. They ate off Sarah's blue-flowered plates, drank from Sarah's crystal glasses, and somehow it felt right instead of wrong. As if Sarah herself was blessing this new beginning, approving of the woman who might someday take her place in this home and in Molly's life. After dinner, while Molly played with her dolls in the corner, Owen and Faith sat by the fire with coffee. The afternoon light was fading, casting long shadows across the cabin floor, and the crackling fire created an intimate atmosphere that made Owen's heart race. "This has been lovely," Faith said softly. "Thank you for inviting me. Thank you for coming." Owen set down his cup, gathering his courage. "Faith, I need to tell you something about what I'm hoping for, what I'm imagining for the future." Faith turned to face him fully, her expression open and attentive. "When Sarah died," Owen began choosing his words carefully, "I thought my life was over. Not in a dramatic way, but in a very real sense. I thought the good parts, the happy parts, were finished. I'd had my chance at love and lost it, and all that was left was raising Molly and keeping the ranch going and just existing until my time was up." Faith's hand found his, encouraging him to continue. "But then you came to Pinarest, and Molly made her Christmas wish, and somehow, impossibly, I started to feel again, started to hope again, started to imagine that maybe life wasn't done with me after all." Owen's voice grew rough with emotion. "You did that, Faith. You and your courage, and your kindness, and your refusal to be anything other than exactly who you are. You reminded me what it feels like to be alive." "Owen," Faith whispered, but he pressed on, needing to get all the words out before his courage failed. "I know it's too soon for certain declarations. We've only known each other a few months, but I also know that what I feel for you is real and strong and worth pursuing. I want to court you properly. Give us time to build something solid. But I need you to know that I'm not just passing time or looking for convenience. I'm looking at you and seeing a future, seeing partnership and companionship, and maybe if we're lucky, love that will last the rest of our lives." Faith was crying now, tears streaming down her face, but she was smiling too. "I see it too," she said, her voice shaking. "I came to Wyoming looking for purpose and found so much more, found a place that feels like home, found students I adore, found a community that accepted me despite my differences, and found you strong and kind and honest, still grieving but brave enough to try again. Owen, I'm not looking for perfection or fairy tales. I'm looking for partnership, for someone to stand beside, not behind. And when I look at you, that's exactly what I see." Owen's heart was hammering so hard he thought it might burst from his chest. "So we're doing this, really doing this." "We're really doing this," Faith confirmed. Then, with a mischievous smile that took years off her face, "Though I should warn you, I'm terrible at cooking. If you're expecting me to take over the kitchen, you're in for disappointment." Owen laughed, the sound rusty but genuine. "I can cook, you can teach. We'll figure out the rest as we go." From the corner, Molly's voice rang out, though she was supposedly absorbed in her dolls. "Does this mean Miss Faith is going to be my new mama?" Both adults turned to find her watching them with barely contained excitement, her dolls forgotten. "Molly," Owen started, but Faith spoke first. "Not new mama," she said gently but firmly. "You already had a mama, sweetheart, and nobody can replace her. But maybe someday I could be something different. Someone who loves you and takes care of you and helps your papa raise you to be the amazing person you're already becoming. Would that be okay?" Molly considered this seriously, then nodded. "That would be very okay. That's what I wished for, actually. For Papa to smile again, and for us to have someone to make our house feel full instead of empty." Owen felt his throat tighten. "Come here, sweetheart." Molly ran over and Owen pulled both her and Faith into an embrace. The three of them clustered together by the fire, while winter winds howled outside and the cabin creaked around them. It felt right in a way Owen hadn't expected. Not like replacing what he'd lost, but like building something new and equally precious.
They spent the rest of the afternoon in comfortable companionship. Faith read to Molly from her fairy tale book while Owen worked on some leather mending. Later, they all bundled up and went outside so Owen could show Faith around the ranch. The barn, the chicken coop, the small herd of cattle huddled against the cold. Faith asked intelligent questions about ranch operations, genuinely interested, and Owen found himself explaining things he'd never bothered discussing with anyone else. As the sun began to set, painting the snow in shades of pink and gold, they stood together on a small rise overlooking the property. Molly had run ahead, building a snowman, leaving the adults in relative privacy. "Owen," Faith said quietly, "there's something I need to tell you about my brother's visit." Owen tensed, but Faith squeezed his hand reassuringly. "Marcus didn't just come to bring me home. He came because my father is ill. Not seriously, but enough to worry the family. My mother wrote asking me to return at least for a visit." Faith's voice was steady, but sad. "I told Marcus no. I told him I couldn't abandon my students mid-year, couldn't leave the school, but the truth is more complicated than that." "Tell me," Owen said. "The truth is, I'm afraid if I go back, they'll find a way to keep me there. My father has connections, money, influence. He could make it very difficult for me to leave again. And the truth is also that I don't want to leave because leaving would mean leaving you, leaving what we're building. And that terrifies me more than disappointing my family." Owen turned her to face him, his hands on her shoulders. "Faith, listen to me. If you need to go see your father, you should go. I won't stand in the way of that. Family is important, even difficult family. But what if they convince me to stay? What if I'm not strong enough to resist? Then I'll come get you," Owen said simply. "I'll travel to Pennsylvania if I have to walk right up to your father's door and tell him that his daughter is needed here. That she's built a life that matters, that she's loved and valued, and that we're not letting her go without a fight." Faith's eyes widened. "You'd do that?" "In a heartbeat." Owen's voice was fierce with certainty. "You stood up to your brother for the right to live your own life. The least I can do is stand with you if you need reinforcement. We're in this together now, Faith. That means supporting each other even when it's hard, especially when it's hard." Fresh tears spilled down Faith's cheeks, but she was smiling. "I don't deserve you." "That's funny," Owen said, brushing away her tears with gentle fingers. "I was just thinking the exact same thing about you." They stood like that for a long moment, close enough to kiss, but not quite bridging that final distance, both of them aware of Molly nearby and the unspoken agreement to take things slowly, properly, respectfully. But the promise hung between them, shimmering and real. This was heading somewhere permanent, somewhere beautiful, somewhere worth waiting for. The winter weeks passed in a blur of school days and Sunday work parties and stolen moments between Owen and Faith. The town watched their courtship with benevolent interest, everyone seeming to have an opinion about when Owen would propose and whether it would happen at the spring dance or maybe at the schoolhouse dedication. But Owen had his own plans. He'd been thinking about it constantly, where, when, how to ask Faith to marry him. It had to be perfect, had to honor both the past and the future, had to feel right in his bones. In late March, as snow began to give way to mud, and the first hints of green appeared on the hills, Owen made his decision. He would take Faith to Hawks Ridge, the place he'd gone to say goodbye to Sarah to ask permission to love again. It felt right to bring Faith there to show her where his heart had begun to thaw, to ask her in that place of endings and beginnings to share his future. The schoolhouse was nearly complete now, just finishing touches remaining. Faith had thrown herself into preparing for the grand opening planning curriculum and ordering supplies and organizing every detail with characteristic thoroughness. She glowed with pride and purpose, and watching her work filled Owen with fierce admiration. On a bright Saturday in early May, when wildflowers were just starting to bloom and the air carried the first real warmth of spring, Owen asked Faith to go on a picnic. Molly, in on the secret, stayed with Mrs. Henderson without complaint, giving her father a knowing smile and a whispered, "Good luck, Papa." Faith met him at her boarding house, wearing a simple dress in pale yellow, her hair caught up loosely, her face bright with anticipation. Owen had packed a basket with food sandwiches, fruit the cookies. Mrs. Preston had contributed when he'd nervously asked for help and borrowed a proper carriage instead of his usual work wagon. "Where are we going?" Faith asked as Owen helped her up. "It's a surprise." Owen said, then hesitated. "Actually, that's not quite true. We're going to Hawks Ridge. There's something I need to show you. There's something important. Faith's expression grew serious, but she nodded. All right, I trust you. Those 3 words, I trust you, settled into Owen's heart like a blessing. He guided the horses out of town toward the familiar trail that wound up into the hills. They talked as they rode, easy conversation about everything and nothing, but Owen felt his nervousness growing with each passing mile. What if she said no? What if it was too soon, too fast, too much? What if his vision of the future didn't match hers? Hawk's Ridge was as beautiful as Owen remembered, maybe more so in spring than it had been in winter. The valleys spread below them in shades of green and gold, the river silver in the sunlight, Pinnerest visible in the distance with its new buildings, including the nearly complete schoolhouse. The wind was gentle here, carrying the scent of wildflowers and new grass. Owen helped Faith down, then spread a blanket on the spot where he'd stood months ago, talking to Sarah's ghost, asking for permission to live again. They sat side by side unpacking the basket, but Owen found he had no appetite. Owen, what's wrong? Faith asked, reading his tension. You've been nervous all morning. I have something to ask you, Owen said, his voice rough. But first I need to tell you about this place.
What?
He told her everything, how he and Sarah used to come here to dream about their future, how he'd proposed to her on this very spot 17 years ago, how he'd returned after her death, seeking some kind of peace or closure, and how he'd come here again in winter after meeting Faith to ask Sarah's spirit for permission to open his heart again. I felt her here that day, Owen said quietly. Or maybe I just felt what I needed to feel, but I left that ridge knowing that it was okay to love again, that Sarah would want me to live, not just exist, that trying to honor her memory by staying frozen in grief wasn't honor at all, but waste. Faith was crying silently, her hand gripping his. You did that for me, Owen continued. You and Molly and this town and life itself, all conspiring to pull me back from the edge I didn't even know I was standing on. You reminded me what it feels like to hope, to laugh, to look forward to tomorrow. He reached into his pocket, pulling out a small box. His hands were shaking as he opened it, revealing a simple gold band, not Sarah's ring, he'd kept that for Molly, but a new ring bought specially for this moment, for this woman, for this new beginning. Faith O'Brien. Owen said, his voice breaking with emotion. You are the bravest person I've ever met. You left everything you knew to chase your dreams, and somehow along the way you helped me remember mine. You make my daughter smile. You make our house feel like a home again. You make me believe that the best parts of my life aren't behind me, but ahead of me, waiting to be lived. He slid off the blanket, kneeling before her in the spring grass, the ring box open in his trembling hands. Will you marry me? Will you take on a widowed rancher and his 2 smart daughter and help us build a family? Will you stand beside me through hard times and good times, through Wyoming winters and prairie summers? Will you let me spend the rest of my life trying to deserve the gift of your love? Faith was openly sobbing now, her hands pressed to her mouth. For a terrible moment, Owen thought she might say no, might decide it was too much, too complicated, too soon. Then she was nodding, laughing, and crying simultaneously. Yes, yes, Owen Fletcher, I will marry you. I'll marry you and love you and build a life with you and Molly and whoever else comes along. Yes. Owen's hand shook so badly he nearly dropped the ring as he slid it onto her finger. It fit perfectly. He'd guessed the size from watching her hands had described them to the jeweler, who'd nodded knowingly and gotten it exactly right. Then Faith was in his arms, and Owen was kissing her for the first time, really kissing her, and the world fell away. There was only this moment, this woman, this impossible joy blooming in his chest where grief had lived for so long. Faith tasted like tears and happiness, and when they finally broke apart, both breathless Owen rested his forehead against hers and whispered, "Thank you. Thank you for saying yes. Thank you for taking a chance on us. Thank you for being brave enough to try again," Faith whispered back. "Thank you for opening your heart. Thank you for letting me in." They sat together on Hawk's Ridge for hours, making plans and dreaming dreams, and kissing like teenagers who just discovered romance. Owen told Faith about his hopes for the ranch, how he wanted to expand, maybe start breeding horses. Faith shared her vision for the school, how she wanted to start a lending library,
Maybe teach evening classes for adults who'd never learned to read.
When Faith asked as the afternoon began to fade. When should we get married? Owen considered.
Not too soon. I want to court you properly. First, let the town see that this is real and lasting. But not too long either. I've already wasted 3 years. I don't want to waste any more time. The schoolhouse dedication is scheduled for late June, Faith said thoughtfully. What if we married after that, maybe July? Give us a few months to prepare, but not drag it out forever. July, Owen agreed. July sounds perfect. They rode back to town as the sun was setting, Faith's hand in Owen's, her new ring catching the fading light. When they reached her boarding house, Faith kissed him once more before going inside, and Owen sat in the carriage for a long moment, just breathing, just feeling, just marveling at the strange and wonderful turns life could take. Then he drove to the Hendersons to collect Molly. His daughter took one look at his face and squealed with delight. She said, "Yes, I knew she would." "Papa, when's the wedding? Can I be in it? Can I call her Mama Faith?" Owen laughed, scooping Molly up despite her protests that she was too old for such things. "Yes," she said, "yes. The wedding will be in July. Yes, you'll be in it. You'll be the most important person there besides me and Faith. And as for what to call her, we'll figure that out together." That night after Molly was asleep, Owen sat at his table and wrote 2 letters. The first was to his sister in Colorado, telling her about Faith, about the engagement, asking her to come for the wedding if she possibly could. The second was harder, a letter to Faith's father in Pennsylvania, formally asking for his daughter's hand, even though the question was already answered, trying to build bridges instead of burning them. He wrote about Faith's courage and kindness, about the difference she was making in Pinehurst, about how loved and valued she was here. He wrote about his own circumstances, the ranch Molly, his widower status, not hiding anything but presenting it all honestly. And he finished by saying that Faith would always be welcome to visit her family, that he would never stand between her and the people she loved, but that her place was here now, building a life that mattered. Owen didn't know if the letter would help or hurt, didn't know if Faith's father would respond, or simply disown his daughter completely. But he'd written it anyway because Faith deserved someone fighting for her, standing up for her, refusing to let her family's disapproval diminish her choices. The next morning was Sunday, and word of the engagement had spread through town with the speed of wildfire. Owen and Faith arrived at church separately, but left together, and the congregation erupted in applause and congratulations. Mrs. Preston was already planning the wedding reception. Tom Carpenter offered to build furniture for the newlyweds. Pastor Williams beamed with satisfaction, claiming he'd known all along this was how it would end. The schoolhouse dedication in late June was a triumph. The building stood proud and beautiful, everything Faith had dreamed of, and more. She gave a speech about education and opportunity and the future of Pinehurst that had half the crowd in tears. Children ran through the new classroom excitedly, their voices echoing off fresh-painted walls, their feet loud on the wooden floors. And Owen stood in the back watching Faith in her element and felt such fierce pride and love that he could barely breathe. After the dedication, Faith pulled him aside, her expression serious. "Owen, I need to tell you something. My father wrote back." Owen tensed, but Faith smiled. "It's good news, actually. He's not happy about my choices, but he's accepting them. He said if you're the man I say you are, then he trusts my judgment. And he's sending a gift, enough money to help with the school to buy books and supplies. His way of making peace, I think." "That's wonderful," Owen said, meaning it. Faith's relationship with her family was complicated, but healing was possible, and that mattered. "There's more," Faith said, her voice dropping. "I'm scared, Owen. Scared of the wedding, of becoming a wife and mother so suddenly. Scared that I won't be good enough, that I'll disappoint you or fail Molly. Scared that I'm taking on more than I can handle." Owen pulled her close right there in the schoolhouse she'd helped build. "I'm scared too," he admitted. "Scared of comparing you to Sarah, even accidentally. Scared that I won't make you happy, that ranch life will be harder than you expect. Scared that loving you this much means I have that much more to lose." "So we're both terrified," Faith said with a shaky laugh. "Absolutely terrified," Owen agreed. "But we're doing it anyway. Because being brave isn't about not being scared. It's about being scared and still choosing to move forward. You taught me that." The wedding took place on a brilliant July morning, the kind of perfect summer day that felt like a blessing from above.
Pastor Williams presided, his voice booming through the church. Molly stood beside Faith as a junior bridesmaid, clutching a bouquet of wildflowers and beaming so brightly she could have lit up the whole building. Owen's sister had made the journey from Colorado, bringing her family and adding joy to the occasion. Some of Faith's siblings had come too, not Marcus, but two of her sisters, and a brother who seemed genuinely happy for her. Faith wore a simple dress in cream silk, her auburn hair adorned with flowers, and when Owen saw her walking down the aisle, his vision blurred with tears. The ceremony was traditional, but personal. When they exchanged vows, Owen's voice shook but held firm as he promised to love and cherish Faith all his days. Faith's voice was clear and strong as she promised the same, her eyes locked on his, full of love and trust and hope for their shared future. When Pastor Williams pronounced them husband and wife, the kiss Owen gave Faith was tender and thorough and full of promise. The church erupted in applause and Molly shouted, "Finally!" which made everyone laugh. The reception was held at the new schoolhouse, the building already becoming the heart of the community it served. There was food enough to feed an army, dancing to fiddle music speeches and toasts that ranged from heartfelt to hilarious. Owen danced with his new wife, with his daughter, with his sister, feeling light and free and so deeply happy it was almost painful. Later, as the celebration wound down and guests began departing, Faith found Owen alone for a moment on the schoolhouse steps. She took his hand, the wedding ring he'd placed there earlier, catching the evening light. "Happy?" she asked. "Beyond measure," Owen said honestly. "You, more than I ever dreamed possible." Faith leaned against his shoulder. "Owen, there's something I need to tell you, something I've been waiting for the right moment to share." Owen's heart stuttered. "What is it?" Faith placed his hand on her stomach, flat and unchanged, but somehow different too. "I wasn't sure at first, but now I am. We're going to have a baby. Our baby. Sometime around Christmas, I think." Owen's world went still. A baby, their baby. The future made real and tangible in a way he hadn't quite imagined. For just a moment, fear gripped him. Memories of Sarah's death, the terror of losing someone he loved, the risk that came with bringing new life into the world. Then Faith's hand covered his, warm and steady and real. "I know you're scared," she said softly. "I know what happened with Sarah haunts you. But Owen, I'm strong. I'm healthy. And we'll face this together, whatever comes. That's what marriage means." Owen pulled her close, his face buried in her hair, his heart too full for words. A baby. A new beginning in the most literal sense. Life-continuing hope made flesh the future bright with possibility. "I love you," he whispered fiercely. "I love you so much, Faith. Thank you for this gift. Thank you for everything." That night, Owen and Faith returned to the ranch with Molly between them in the wagon. The cabin glowed with lamplight welcoming them home. Inside, Faith's belongings were already mixed with Owen's, her books on his shelves, her clothes in Sarah's old closet, her presence filling every corner with new life and warmth. Molly went to bed happily, already calling Faith Mama Faith, with ease, secure in the knowledge that loving her new mother didn't mean forgetting her first one. And when Owen and Faith finally had a moment alone standing together in the cabin that was now truly their home, Owen felt the last pieces of his broken heart finally fused together, not erasing the scars, but incorporating them into something stronger, something that had survived pain and come out whole on the other side. A little girl asked Santa for a mother, Faith said softly, echoing words from another lifetime, another season. And a cowboy's Christmas wish came true. Owen pulled her close, his wife, his partner, his future. "Not just Molly's wish," he corrected gently. "Mine too. I just didn't know it until you walked into my life and reminded me how to hope." Outside, the Wyoming stars blazed brilliant against the black sky. The summer wind whispered through the prairie grass, carrying the promise of harvest and plenty. And inside the Fletcher home, three people who'd all been lonely in their own ways settled into the first night of their new life together, a life built on courage and faith, and the stubborn belief that sometimes, if you're brave enough to keep your heart open, miracles really do come true. The months that followed were filled with the ordinary magic of family life. Faith continued teaching while Owen worked the ranch, and Molly thrived, having two parents who adored her.
As Faith's pregnancy progressed, the cabin seemed to grow even warmer, even more alive with anticipation and joy. On Christmas Eve, exactly 1 year after Molly had whispered her wish to Santa, Faith went into labor. Owen, terrified but trying to be strong, sent for the doctor and held his wife's hand through every contraction, whispering encouragement and love. And when their son was born just after midnight on Christmas morning, healthy and loud and perfect, Owen wept with relief and gratitude and overwhelming love. They named him Samuel Owen Fletcher, and Molly proclaimed him the best Christmas present ever. Faith, exhausted but glowing, held their son while Owen held them both. And in that moment, Owen felt Sarah's presence one final time, not sad or jealous, but pleased and peaceful, her blessing clear. The Fletcher home stood warm and bright against the Wyoming winter, filled now with laughter and crying and all the messy, beautiful chaos of family life. A widow who'd learned to love again. A teacher who'd found her calling. A little girl whose Christmas wish had come true. And a baby who'd never know loneliness, born into a family forged from loss and courage and the stubborn refusal to let grief be the final word. Some wishes take time to come true. Some miracles require patience and courage and the willingness to open your heart even when it's been broken. But in the end, love wins. Hope endures. And sometimes, in the depths of Wyoming winter, Christmas wishes really do come true, bringing with them not just happiness, but healing, not just love, but life renewed. The story of Owen Fletcher and Faith O'Brien wasn't about forgetting the past or replacing what was lost. It was about honoring memory while embracing possibility, about finding the courage to try again, even when you're terrified about building new dreams on the foundation of old ones. It was proof that hearts are indeed big enough to hold many kinds of love, and that sometimes the greatest gift we can give ourselves is permission to be happy again. In Pinarest, Wyoming, where community mattered and people took care of their own, the Fletcher family became a testament to resilience and faith and the transformative power of love. And every Christmas Eve thereafter, when Molly told her little brother the story of the wish that changed everything, Owen and Faith would hold hands and remember the loneliness, the fear, the risk, and the ultimate reward of choosing courage over safety, life over mere existence, love over loss. Their story ended where it began, with snow falling on a small Wyoming town, with a family gathered close around a fire, with hope bright in the darkness, and love strong enough to weather any storm. A little girl had asked Santa for a mother. A cowboy's Christmas wish had come true. And in the process, they'd all discovered that sometimes the best miracles are the ones you create yourself, one brave choice at a time.